From now on, this place works for us. Emily Carter heard those words and felt something inside her go completely still. Not from fear, but from the sudden terrible clarity that the life she had spent 12 years building was being taken from her in real time by a man who believed she had no one left to call. She was wrong about being alone, but she didn't know that yet, and neither did he. Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The door to Silver Creek Laundry had a particular sound when it closed all the way. A soft mechanical click, the kind you stop noticing after the first few dozen times you heard it, the kind that became background noise, along with the tumbling of machines and the hum of the overhead lights and the low murmur of people talking about nothing important. Emily Carter had heard that sound approximately 10,000 times in 12 years. She heard it when she opened the doors at 7 in the morning and when she locked up near midnight. She heard it when customers came in dragging overloaded laundry bags and when they left carrying folded clean clothes they hadn't been able to wash at home. She heard it so many times that it had become a part of her body's rhythm, something her nervous system registered and immediately dismissed. But at 11:36 on a Thursday night, when Derek Vaughn pushed through that front door with two men behind him and then turned and threw the deadbolt with his own hand, the sound that click made went through Emily Carter like a blade. Because it was not the sound of someone entering a business. It was the sound of someone claiming a space that did not belong to him. Emily was behind the counter when it happened. She had been tallying the day's receipts, her reading glasses pushed up on her nose, a cold cup of coffee sitting forgotten next to the register. The last four customers in the laundromat, a young woman folding towels near machine 11, an older gentleman reading a newspaper by the window, a teenage boy waiting on a plastic chair while his mother loaded a dryer. All of them felt the change in the air before they fully understood what was causing it. The young woman stopped folding. The old man lowered his newspaper. The mother put her hand on her son's shoulder and began steering him slowly, quietly toward the counter area away from the men who had just walked in. Nobody needed to say anything. The body understood threat before the mind finished processing it. Derek Vaughn walked through the laundromat like a man completing a transaction he had already decided on. He was 32 years old, broad-shouldered, with a gold chain that caught the fluorescent light and a look in his eyes that had probably frightened a lot of people before tonight. His two companions took positions near the door and near the side hallway that led to the back storage room. Not random, not casual, positioned. Emily took off her reading glasses. "We're closed," she said. Her voice came out steady. That surprised her. Derek smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing warm in it, the kind worn by someone who had learned that a certain expression made people more uncomfortable than open anger. "You're not closed," he said. "Your lights are on. Your machines are running. Last wash ended an hour ago. The machines are finishing cycles. You need to leave." He didn't leave. He walked to the nearest washing machine, put his hand on top of it like he was petting something that belonged to him, and looked around the room with the slow, deliberate patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. "Actually," Derek said, "I came to talk about a new arrangement." The young woman with the towels quietly finished folding them, quietly picked up her bag, quietly walked to the door. She looked at Emily once, and in that look was something Emily recognized, not cowardice, but the specific calculation of someone who understood that staying would not help. The old man with the newspaper folded it under his arm. The mother and her teenage son moved toward the exit without a word. Within 90 seconds of Derek locking that door, he had somehow managed to empty the room. Nobody wanted to be a witness. Nobody wanted to become the next name on whatever list Derek kept. Emily stood alone behind the counter. She had been in difficult situations before. The early years of building this laundromat had been nothing but difficult situations. Broken equipment, lease disputes, months when the cost of water and electricity and supplies nearly matched what she brought in. She had fought through all of it with the specific, quiet stubbornness of someone who has decided that something matters enough to bleed for it. But this was different, because you could problem solve a broken machine. You could negotiate a lease dispute. You could find a way through a hard month. You couldn't problem solve a man who had decided he was taking what he wanted. "There's no new arrangement," Emily said. "This is my business. I need you to leave." Derek reached the counter. He leaned on it with both forearms, bringing himself to her eye level, and looked at her with that same smile. "Here's the thing about arrangements," he said quietly. They don't always need two people to agree. He had been coming to Silver Creek Laundry for almost 4 months. It had not started like this. It had started the way most bad things start, gradually, reasonably, with a face that seemed harmless. Derek had first appeared on a Wednesday evening in late January. He carried one bag of laundry. He paid in cash. He sat in a corner and scrolled his phone while his clothes washed, and he thanked Emily politely when he left. Completely ordinary, the kind of customer she served 50 times a week. He came back the following Wednesday, and the one after that. The third time he came, he asked about her back storage room. "I've got some equipment I need to store somewhere secure for a week or two," he told her. "Nothing big. I'll pay you for the space, cash up front." Emily had hesitated. She had policies about the storage room. It was for laundry supplies for extra machines awaiting repair, not for customer storage. But business had been slow that winter, and Derek had seemed earnest, and the amount he offered was not insignificant. She said yes. That was the decision she spent the next 4 months regretting. Within 2 weeks, the week or two became indefinite. Within 3 weeks, Derek was coming not just on Wednesdays, but on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and sometimes late on Sunday nights. He always had at least one other person with him. The storage room began to feel less like a space he was renting and more like a territory he was claiming. Emily started finding the door propped open in ways she hadn't left it. She started noticing that her cleaning staff mentioned feeling uncomfortable when certain men were in the back. She raised the issue with Derek directly. "I think we need to revisit our arrangement," she told him one evening in February. "The storage agreement was temporary. I need that room back." Derek looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "I appreciate you telling me that. Let me take care of some things, and I'll have my equipment cleared out by the end of the month." End of the month came. The equipment was not cleared out. The men kept coming. She tried again in March. "Derek, I've asked you twice now, the storage room." "I hear you," he said. "I'm working on it. You know how logistics are." She did not know how logistics were in whatever sense he meant it, but she also didn't know exactly what was in those large sealed boxes in her storage room. And some part of her, the part that had been alive on this earth long enough to recognize when something was dangerous, told her that pushing too hard too fast might be the wrong move. She had started documenting everything instead. Dates, times, descriptions of the men who came and went, written notes in a locked drawer at home. Photographs of the storage room taken on her phone when Derek and his people weren't there. Security footage from the cameras she'd installed when she first opened the business cameras that Derek had studied carefully during his first few weeks, cameras she'd never moved or mentioned because she wanted him to think he understood the surveillance situation better than he did. She was building something. She just wasn't sure she'd have enough time to finish building it. In early April, one of her longtime customers, a woman named Rosa, who had been coming to Silver Creek Laundry every Saturday for 9 years, stopped coming. Emily noticed. She called Rosa's number. "Rosa, I haven't seen you in a few weeks. Just checking in." There was a pause on the line. "Emily," Rosa said carefully, "I love your place. You know I do. But the last couple of times I came, some men were there that made me uncomfortable. I just felt safer going to the place on Oak Street." Emily thanked her, hung up, sat quietly for a long time. Rosa was not the only one. She could see it in the foot traffic numbers, which had been dropping since February. She could see it in the faces of customers who came in, clocked the presence of Derek's people in the back, and washed their clothes more quickly than usual before leaving. She could see it in the fact that after 9 p.m., Silver Creek Laundry was nearly always empty now, where 6 months ago it had been reliably busy until midnight. Derek was driving her customers away, not with threats, not openly, not in any way she could point to clearly, but with his presence, with the presence of his people, with the specific atmosphere they created, simply by occupying a space and making everyone in it feel like they were intruding on something they didn't want to know about. And Emily was watching her business die one empty machine at a time. She had contacted a lawyer in late March. The lawyer listened carefully and then told her gently but honestly that what she described sounded like an informal tenancy dispute, complicated by the lack of a formal written agreement. The storage arrangement had been verbal. The intimidation was difficult to prove without clear evidence of explicit threats. The best path forward would be to formally terminate the arrangement in writing, consult with local law enforcement about her concerns, and document everything. She had done all the three. The formal written notice had been delivered to Derek, who accepted it without expression and then continued showing up exactly as before. Local law enforcement had listened. One officer had even come to the laundromat and spoken with Derek, who was unfailingly polite and cooperative, who showed the officer his receipts for the storage space, who presented himself as a small business owner, simply using available commercial storage. The officer had told Emily he would keep an eye on the situation. He had not come back, and the documentation continued to grow in Emily's locked drawer at home. She had not given up, but she was getting tired, and tired was a different thing from defeated, but it was closer than she wanted to be. It was in that context, tired, careful, quietly building her case, watching her business slowly shrink around her, that Jackson Walker had first walked through the door. He came on a Tuesday evening, about 3 weeks before the night Derek locked the door behind him. Jackson was 58 years old. He moved like a man who had stopped having anything to prove about 20 years ago. Jeans, heavy boots, a worn black leather vest over a gray shirt, the vest carrying patches that Emily registered without fully reading. He carried a large canvas laundry bag. He loaded 2 machines, sat down in the corner chair by machine number 7, took out his phone, and began reading something with the focused quiet of a man who had decided that his laundry day was going to be peaceful and nothing was going to interfere with that plan. He was completely unextraordinary. He was the kind of customer who blended into the background so completely that Emily almost didn't notice when Derek's 2 associates came in through the side entrance later that evening and moved toward the back hallway. She noticed Derek's men. She watched them. She did not watch Jackson, but Jackson watched everything. He had been there for almost 40 minutes when he got up, brought his laundry bag to the counter to buy detergent, and looked at Emily with calm gray eyes. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. She didn't pretend she didn't understand. "About 4 months," she said. He nodded like she'd confirmed something he'd already calculated. "You called anyone? Police, lawyer, neither helped much. You scared?" She thought about it, truly thought about it, instead of giving the reflexive answer. "I'm more angry than scared," she said finally. "But yes, some nights." Jackson nodded again. He paid for his detergent. He went back to machine number 7. And 15 minutes later, when his clothes were done and he was loading them into a dryer, he came back to the counter one more time. "My name is Jackson," he said, "Emily." He reached into the front pocket of his vest and put a folded piece of paper on the counter. "That's a number," he said. "If you ever get to a point where you feel like this place isn't yours anymore, if something happens and you need someone to know about it, call that number or put a red sign on the counter where I can see it when I come in." Emily looked at the paper. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said. "Neither am I," Jackson said. "I'm just letting you know the option exists." He finished his laundry and left. She put the number in her phone. She did not put a red sign on the counter. Not that night, not the week after. She kept building her documentation. She kept serving her customers. She kept trying to solve this through the legitimate channel she believed in, because she was not someone who looked for shortcuts, and she was not someone who liked the idea of bringing more unpredictable elements into an already unpredictable situation. But the night Derek locked the front door and told her the place worked for him, now that was the night she understood that the legitimate channels were not going to move fast enough, because Derek was not interested in waiting for legitimate channels. He was here now, and he had brought 5 men instead of 2. "You need to hear something," Derek said, standing at her counter, leaning close enough that she could see the fine detail of his gold chain and the confidence in his face that came from having done this before, from having walked into situations where the person on the other side had less backup and less willingness to escalate and less stomach for whatever came next. "I've been patient," he continued. "I've let this go nice and slow because I didn't want to make a scene. You're a nice woman. This is a nice place, but I've got business needs, and what I've been using the back room for isn't enough anymore. I need the whole operation." "The whole operation," Emily repeated. "The books, the accounts, the machines are useful. The laundry business makes a good front for certain things. You'd still work here. I'd just be the owner." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was offering her a business partnership, like this was a negotiation she had agreed to enter. "Get out of my laundromat," Emily said. The temperature in the room dropped. Derek stood up straight, the casual lean disappeared. The something behind the smile became more visible. I'm going to need you to think more carefully about your answer, he said. I didn't ask for time to think. I gave you my answer. One of the men near the door shifted his weight. The one near the hallway straightened up. The room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. Derek reached across the counter and picked up Emily's phone. Just picked it up, off the counter, where it had been sitting next to her cold coffee and her reading glasses and the day's receipts. He turned it over in his hand. You're going to need to calm down, he said, and you're going to need to understand that this is already decided. It doesn't matter what you want. It matters what I'm telling you. Emily looked at her phone in his hand. She looked at the 5 men positioned around her laundromat. She looked at the locked front door. And then she looked past Derek's shoulder toward the back corner of the room, toward the chair beside machine number 7 that had been empty when Derek arrived, and where someone now sat quietly, having entered through the side door at some point in the last 20 minutes, while all the attention in the room was pointed the other way. A man in a worn black leather vest, sitting with the patient, unhurried stillness of someone who had already seen everything he needed to see. Derek followed her eyes. He turned. He saw Jackson Walker. Jackson had not moved. He was sitting with one arm resting on the machine beside him, a half-empty coffee cup on the small table to his right, watching Derek with the same calm gray eyes that had looked at Emily 3 weeks ago when he'd asked her how long this had been going on. Who are you? Derek said. Jackson didn't answer immediately. He took a slow sip of his coffee. Then he put the cup down. Then he looked at Derek. I'm a man doing his laundry, he said. Derek stared at him. The silence stretched. You need to mind your own business, Derek said. I'm trying to, Jackson replied, but you're making a lot of noise. Derek turned fully toward Jackson now. He had forgotten about Emily for the moment, which was a mistake, but Derek was the kind of person who made that particular mistake regularly, getting distracted by the thing he didn't understand, instead of managing the thing he thought he already had under control. You know what's happening here, Derek said. You know what you just walked into. Oh. I've been sitting here for about 20 minutes, Jackson said. I have a pretty good idea. Then you should leave. This doesn't involve you. Jackson set his coffee down with quiet deliberateness. See, here's my problem with that, he said. This woman's been running this laundromat for 12 years. I can see from where I'm sitting that she built this place up herself. I can see from the way she's standing right now that she's not afraid of you, even though she probably should be, which tells me something about her character. And I can see that you walked in here, locked her door, took her phone, and told her you're taking her business. So when you say this doesn't involve me, I understand why you'd say that. I just disagree. Derek laughed. It was a short, contemptuous sound. Old man, he said, I've got 5 people in this room. You've got a coffee cup. Think about the math. Jackson said nothing for a moment. Then he reached into the pocket of his leather vest and took out his phone. He made a call. It lasted 4 seconds. He said exactly one thing into the phone before hanging up. He said, we're at Silver Creek. Derek watched this happen. That's supposed to mean something, he said. It'll mean something in about 8 minutes, Jackson said. Derek looked at Emily. His expression had shifted from confident to calculating, still in control, still certain of his position, but running a quick internal assessment of what this wrinkle might mean. Whoever you called, Derek said, isn't going to change anything. Probably not, Jackson agreed, but they'd like to be here anyway. Emily stood behind the counter and felt something shift in the room that she couldn't fully name. Not yet, but something had moved. Something that had been angled only one direction a minute ago was no longer quite as settled. She looked at Jackson. He looked back at her. And for the first time since Derek Vaughn had walked through her front door and locked it behind him, Emily Carter felt something other than the cold, tight weight of being cornered. She felt something that was not yet certainty, but it was the beginning of something. It was the first breath of it, the possibility that she might not be as alone as Derek believed. He stood in the center of her laundromat, so holding her phone, surrounded by his 5 men, looking at a 58-year-old biker, sitting quietly with a coffee cup and the absolute unhurried patience of someone who knew something Derek didn't know yet. And outside, somewhere in the dark, the sound of the city was starting to change. Not dramatically, not yet. But for anyone who knew how to listen, for anyone whose body had calibrated itself over decades of life and consequence to the specific frequencies of things about to shift, there was something building at the edges of the night, something that was 8 minutes away. Derek Vaughn heard the city. He just didn't know what he was listening to. 8 minutes was a long time when nobody in the room wanted to talk. Derek Vaughn was not a man who tolerated silence well. He had built his entire operation on noise, on the threat of what he might do, on the performance of confidence, on keeping other people off balance by never giving them a quiet moment to think. Silence was his enemy because silence gave people space to calculate, and calculated people were harder to move than frightened ones. So he filled it. "You know what your problem is," he said to Emily, turning back toward the counter. Like Jackson Walker was already a settled matter, already categorized and dismissed. You never learned when to stop fighting something that's already decided. Emily did not answer. She was watching the room, watching Derek's men, watching the locked door, watching Jackson in the corner, and doing the same mental arithmetic she had been doing for 4 months, the same patient, exhausting calculation of how much evidence she had and how fast she could move, and what the gap was between what she could prove and what she knew to be true. "You have good instincts for business," Derek continued. He had picked up one of her framed photographs from the counter, a picture from the laundromat's opening day. Emily, young and grinning and holding a ribbon, and was turning it over in his hands. 12 years running a place like this, staying solvent, keeping customers. That's not nothing. I'm not saying you're not capable. Put that down, Emily said. He didn't. What I'm saying is that capability and good judgment aren't the same thing. You could have made this easy 6 weeks ago. I gave you time. I was patient. You kept pushing back, kept documenting things, kept making calls that went nowhere. He set the photograph down, not carefully. And here we are. The man near the side hallway shifted. He was 26, maybe 27, built like someone who spent time in gyms and less time thinking, and he had been watching Jackson with an expression caught between contempt and something he wouldn't have admitted was uncertainty. He looked at Derek. "We gonna do this, or what?" "We're talking," Derek said. "We've been talking." "I said we're talking." The man went quiet, but the impatience was still there, visible in the set of his shoulders, in the way he kept glancing toward Jackson, like he was waiting for the old man to do something he could respond to. Derek looked back at Emily. "Here's what happens now," he said. "You're going to hand me the keys to the register and the keys to the back room, and you're going to sit down and we're going to go through the books together, and by the time we're done tonight, you're going to understand the new arrangement well enough to work inside it." Emily put both hands flat on the counter. "No," she said. Derek's jaw tightened, not dramatically, barely visible, but there. "Emily, no, you've said everything you're going to say. I've heard all of it. The answer is no. It will be no in 5 minutes. It will be no in an hour. You can stand here all night, and it will still be no." The room was very quiet. The washing machines kept turning. The one near machine 11 made its particular stuttering sound on the spin cycle, the one Emily had been meaning to have looked at for 3 weeks. The mechanical complaint of a belt that was wearing down the small, ordinary sound of a business that was still running, regardless of what was happening to the person trying to keep it alive. Derek moved toward her. Not fast, measured. The way a man moves when he wants to make sure the other person understands that the movement itself is a message. He reached the counter and stopped. "I think you're confused about your options," he said quietly. "I think you're confused about mine," Emily said. From the corner, Jackson's voice came across the room, unhurried, clear. "How many years you been doing this?" Derek turned his head without turning his body, a slow, irritated rotation. "I told you to stay out of this." "You did," Jackson agreed. "I'm asking anyway. How long?" "Because I've seen this pattern a lot. Man builds up a small operation, needs to expand, looks around for something that looks vulnerable, looks for a woman running something alone, looks for a place where the legal situation is complicated enough that the cops don't move fast." He paused. "How many places you run this on before this one?" Derek stared at him. "That's what I thought," Jackson said. "You don't know anything about me. I know the type. I've known men like you my whole life. Some of them worked for me for a while. Not for long." Jackson's voice was conversational, the way someone sounds when they're talking about weather or old memories. "The ones who do what you're doing, they're not really businessmen. They're intimidators who figured out that intimidation works on most people most of the time and built a whole operation on that assumption. Works great until you find the exception." Derek walked toward him. 3 steps, 4. He stopped about 6 feet away. "Last chance, old man. Jackson looked up at him without any visible change in his expression. For what? To leave this building voluntarily. Jackson picked up his coffee cup, took a sip, put it back. My clothes are still in the dryer, he said. One of Derek's men, the one who'd been near the door, laughed. Short and sharp, the involuntary sound of someone who finds something funny despite themselves. Derek spun. The man stopped laughing. Something funny? No, then be useful. Check the back. The man moved toward the hallway without another word. The atmosphere in the room had shifted in a way that was hard to pin down precisely. The same people were in the same positions, the same lights overhead, the same machines running, but something in the configuration had changed. Derek's authority in the room had been perfect and unquestioned 60 seconds ago. Now it had a small crack in it, nothing structural, nothing anyone would point to directly. But the man who had laughed, and Derek had reacted, and the reaction had been slightly too sharp, slightly more than the situation required, and all of that was information. Emily filed it. She had been filing information for 4 months. She was very good at it by now. Derek turned back to her. Where's your phone? You're holding it, she said. He looked down at his hand at her phone like he'd forgotten it was there. Passcode, he said. No. Emily. No. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he set the phone on the counter between them, face down, and walked to one of the plastic chairs near the middle of the room and sat down like a man settling in for a long negotiation. Okay, he said. We'll wait. For what? Emily said. For you to make a smarter decision. Emily didn't respond. She put her reading glasses back on. She picked up her pen. She returned to the receipts she had been tallying before Derek walked in, as if he weren't there, as if 5 men weren't positioned around her laundromat, as if none of this were happening. It was a performance. She knew that Derek knew it, but it was an important performance because it communicated something that threatened him more than anger would have. It communicated that she was not afraid enough to abandon her routine, that she had decided to be exactly herself regardless of his presence. Derek watched her for almost 2 full minutes without speaking. Then what are you doing, reconciling the day's receipts? Emily said without looking up. I'm sitting right here. I can see that. Another pause. You're not even going to look at me. Emily looked up, met his eyes, held them for 3 seconds, steady and direct, and absolutely without the scrambling, apologetic energy he was used to seeing from people in her position. I've looked at you, she said. I've listened to you. I've given you exactly as much of my attention as you've earned. She looked back down. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. From the corner, Jackson made a sound. Not a word, just a small sound low in his throat that could have been almost anything but landed in the room like the beginning of a laugh that had been held back just in time. Derek's head snapped toward him. You think this is funny? I think she's got a lot of nerve, Jackson said. I respect it. I didn't ask what you respect. You didn't. Still true, though. Derek stood up, and that was the moment the front door moved. Not opened, it was still locked but moved. Pressure from the other side, a testing knock, 3 beats specific and deliberate. Derek looked at the man still standing near the door. The man looked back uncertain. Derek nodded. The man leaned toward the door. Who is it? A voice from outside. Maria, I've got a pickup. Derek's man looked at Derek. Derek shook his head. The man turned back to the door. We're closed. I can see the lights are on. I just need 2 minutes. I left a bag in dryer 7. Derek's man started to say something dismissive. Emily spoke before he could. Tell her she can come back in the morning, Emily said carefully. The dryer will be off by then. Her things will be safe. There was something in the way she said it, a very slight emphasis on the word safe, or maybe on things, or maybe it was in the specific calm of her voice, the voice of a woman who knew the person on the other side of that door and was sending information wrapped inside an instruction. Derek didn't catch it. Maria did. Oh, okay, the voice said through the door with a pause in the middle that didn't quite match casual acceptance. I'll come back in the morning. Thanks, Emily. Of course, Emily said. Good night. Footsteps outside the door receding. Derek looked at Emily with narrowed eyes. You knew her. She's a regular customer, Emily said. You said something to her. I told her to come back in the morning. You said it a certain way. Emily looked at him with the exact expression of a woman who did not understand what he meant and was patiently waiting for him to clarify. Derek stared at her. He was not a stupid man. That was the thing about Derek Vaughn that had taken Emily a while to understand. He was not stupid. He was smart in the specific adaptive way of someone who had survived through attention and pattern recognition, who understood people's behaviors well enough to predict and exploit them. He could feel that something had happened. He could feel that the woman behind the counter was more in control of this situation than she appeared to be, that there were layers to this that he hadn't mapped yet. But he didn't know what he didn't know, and that gap between what he sensed and what he could identify was making him impatient. "You," he said, pointing at the man near the hallway who had returned from checking the back. "Go outside, make sure nobody's making calls." The man left through the side entrance. Now there were 3 men in the room plus Derek. Emily noted this without expression. She looked at the clock on the wall, 11:51, 15 minutes since Derek had locked the door. 15 minutes since she had registered the weight of her situation and started the internal counting. Not panic counting, not the kind of counting you do when you're measuring how long you can survive. The steady, regular counting of someone who knows that time is on their side in ways she hasn't been able to say out loud yet. She looked at Jackson. He was looking at his watch. Then he looked at her. He gave the smallest possible movement of his head, almost imperceptible. Not a nod so much as a slight downward tilt that communicated something she needed about 10 seconds to decode. He had said 8 minutes on the phone. It had been 15, which meant whatever was coming was already close enough to have arrived and was choosing for some reason she couldn't know from where she was standing to wait. Derek started talking again. She let the words wash over her while her mind worked below the surface. "You know the crazy thing," Derek said, pacing now, his movements carrying the specific energy of a man whose patience was compressing into something that was going to need an outlet soon. "I didn't have to come here. I could have gone with one of 3 other locations. This neighborhood, this block, there are 2 other businesses that would have worked just as well for my purposes. But I picked this place because I thought the owner was reasonable. I thought she'd understand pragmatism." "Tell me about the other 2 businesses," Emily said. Derek stopped pacing. "What? The other 2 businesses you considered? Who owns them?" "That's not..." He blinked. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because if you're telling me you've done this before, that you've established the same kind of arrangement at other locations, then that's something I'd want to document." The word document landed in the room like a stone hitting still water. Rings expanding outward. Derek looked at her. Really looked at her. The kind of look that recalibrates, that runs backward through the last 15 minutes and reassesses every exchange from a different angle. "What have you been documenting?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Everything," Emily said. The room was very quiet. The spin cycle on machine 11 wound down. The sound of tumbling clothes slowed and stopped. The laundromat was suddenly quieter than it had been all night. Derek walked back to the counter. "Everything," and he repeated. 4 months, dates times the names. I could find the vehicle plates. I could read photographs of the storage room, the contents. I could see security footage from every camera in this building." She kept her voice level. "The police weren't helpful in March, but evidence accumulates. And the thing about documenting everything consistently over a long period is that eventually what you have is not a complaint. It's a case." Derek put his hands on the counter. "Where is it?" "Not here." Emily, "Ow. It's not here," she said again. "It's in 3 separate places. Digital backups, physical copies, in one set with someone I trust who has instructions about what to do with it if something happens to me or to this business." The thing that crossed Derek's face in that moment was not anger. It was something more complicated, the specific expression of a man who has walked into a room believing he understood the geometry of it and has just discovered that the walls are not where he thought they were. He had come tonight to finalize a takeover. He had come with 5 men and a locked door and the certainty of someone who had done this before and knew how it went. He had not come prepared for a woman who had been building a legal case against him for 4 months while appearing to do nothing more than run a laundromat. He stared at her. "You've been playing me," he said. "I've been protecting myself," Emily said. "Those aren't the same thing. How long have you been waiting for tonight?" "I wasn't waiting for tonight. I was hoping tonight wouldn't come. I would have been very happy if you'd accepted the written termination notice and disappeared. I would have preferred that enormously." She paused. "But you didn't." Derek pulled out his own phone. You know what happens to people who build cases against me, he said. I imagine you're going to tell me. They don't get to finish building them. And right then, with Derek's phone in his hand, and his face doing something that was no longer quite in control, with his two remaining men watching from their positions, and Jackson Walker watching from the corner. Right then, the first sound came from outside. Not a knock, not a voice. A sound that Emily had never heard in 12 years of running this laundromat. A sound that came from far away and got closer with a speed that compressed distance in a way that suggested many of them at once. The deep, layered, unmistakable thunder of motorcycles. Not one, not five. The kind of sound made by an arrival rather than a passing. Derek looked toward the front window. The two men looked at Derek. Jackson Walker in the corner by machine number 7 picked up his coffee cup and drained the last of it with the unhurried calm of a man whose dinner reservation had finally been confirmed. Emily kept her hands flat on the counter and felt the vibration of the engines travel up through the floor of the building she had spent 12 years fighting to keep. Outside, the sound grew and grew. Derek walked to the front window. He looked out. And Emily watched the exact moment that Derek Vaughn understood that he had made a serious miscalculation. She watched it move across his face the way weather moves across an open field, fast visible, impossible to stop once it started. His jaw tightened, his shoulders pulled back, his hands at his sides closed and opened. Who are those people, he said. Not to Emily, not to Jackson, not to anyone in particular. Talking to the window, talking to the night outside. Jackson answered anyway. Friends of mine, he said. Derek spun. How many? Enough, Jackson said. More than enough. The man near the door had gone completely still. The one in the middle of the room was watching Derek with the expression of someone waiting to be told what the plan was, because the plan he'd arrived with tonight was no longer a plan that fit the situation and he needed a new one, and he was looking at Derek to provide it, and Derek was not providing it. Derek walked back toward the counter. His voice was lower now. You call them? He asked Emily. The phone you're holding is mine, Emily said. I haven't had it since you walked in. Derek looked at the phone, her phone still face down on the counter where he'd set it. He looked at Jackson. You called them from your phone, he said, right after we started talking. That's what you did. I made a call, Jackson said. You said we're at Silver Creek. I did. Who did you call? Jackson put the empty coffee cup down. He stood up. He was not a physically imposing man in the way Derek's men were physically imposing. Not wide in the shoulders, not young, and built for confrontation. He was 58 years old, with gray in his hair and lines in his face and a way of moving that was slow enough to seem almost careful. But when he stood up, the room changed. There was no performance in it, no squaring of shoulders, no adjustment of posture, no attempt to signal anything. He simply stood, and the standing itself was enough because the people who watched it understood that they were looking at someone who had been comfortable sitting precisely because he had no doubt whatsoever about what standing would mean. You know the patch on my vest, Jackson said. Derek looked at the vest. He looked at the patches. His face did something complicated. Jackson Walker, Jackson said, goes by Grizzly, president of the Silver Creek Charter Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. He said it the way someone recites their address, familiar, factual, without drama. Those people outside, they're not guys I called for backup. They're guys I ride with. They go where I go. And I've been sitting in this laundromat for the last 25 minutes because I come here every Tuesday and this is where I do my laundry. He looked at Derek evenly. You picked the wrong night to do this. Derek Vaughn was not the kind of man who showed fear easily. Emily had watched him for 4 months, and she had almost never seen the mask slip, the confidence, the performance of invulnerability. That was the core business product of someone who operated the way he did. She had seen him impatient. She had seen him calculating. She had seen him frustrated. She had not seen him afraid until now. It was brief, less than 2 seconds. A flinch that wasn't quite a flinch, a contraction of the face and the body that he got under control almost immediately. But Emily saw it, and from across the room, Jackson saw it, and Derek knew they both saw it, which made it worse. This doesn't change anything, Derek said. That's one way to look at it, Jackson said. Whatever you think you've done here. I haven't done anything, Jackson said. I sat in a chair and drank coffee. You're the one who locked the door. The man near the door was looking outside with an expression that had left the territory of uncertainty and entered something closer to alarm. The motorcycles outside were not leaving. They were not circling. The sound of them had changed engines, cutting off one by one in the specific cadence of a group that has arrived at its destination and has no immediate plans to depart. Derek's second man walked up to him. "Derek," he said quietly, "there's a lot of them." "I know. I mean, there's a lot of them. I heard you. So what are we? I'm thinking." Emily looked at the clock. 11:58, 22 minutes since the door was locked. The receipts on the counter in front of her were still unfinished. The reading glasses were still on her face. The coffee beside her was still cold. None of those things had changed. A great deal of everything else had. The side door opened. The man Derek had sent outside to monitor the street came back in. His face told the story before he said anything. He looked at Derek with the expression of someone who has been sent to assess a situation and has returned with an assessment nobody is going to like. "It's the angels," he said. Nobody responded. "Full formation. They're on both ends of the block. I counted at least 30 bikes. There might be more around the corner." The room absorbed this. 30, Derek said flatly. "At least, could be 40. Derek stood very still. Emily watched him think. She could almost see the calculation happening, the assets he had in this room. 3 men, plus himself, 4 men against a street full of motorcycle club members who had arrived not because of a payment or a deal, but because one of their own had made a phone call, which meant their personal investment in the outcome was absolute. She watched Derek run this math and arrive at an answer that didn't work. He looked at Jackson. Jackson was putting on his jacket, methodically, like a man getting ready to check his laundry. "You planned this," Derek said. "I came to wash my clothes," Jackson said. "You knew I was going to come tonight." "I had a feeling," Jackson said. "Emily's been patient for 4 months. You're the impatient type. This was going to come to a head." He zipped his jacket. "I just wanted to be nearby when it did." "For her." Jackson looked at Emily, then at Derek. "For what's right," he said, which is the same thing in this case. Emily felt something move in her chest, not romantic, not dramatic, something quieter and more durable. The specific feeling of being seen by someone who had no obligation to see you and had chosen to anyway. The weight of having been watched over quietly without her permission or her knowledge by someone who had decided on his own that she was worth watching over. She had been alone for a long time. She had been building a case alone and fighting alone and going home alone at night to a locked drawer full of documentation because there was no one else to give it to. And all along on Tuesday evening, someone had been sitting in the corner doing his laundry and watching to make sure she was okay. She blinked. She straightened her reading glasses. She did not cry, but it was a close thing. Derek made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a sigh, and contained in it the compressed worry of a man realizing that an outcome he had been certain of was no longer available to him. He looked at his men. He looked at Jackson. He looked at the front window at the dark street outside where the motorcycle sat. "This isn't over," he said. Jackson nodded agreeably. "You're right," he said. "It isn't, but this part of it is." He looked at Derek with the same calm gray eyes that had looked at Emily 3 weeks ago across a counter when he'd asked her how long it had been going on. "You're going to give her back her phone. You're going to unlock that door, and you and your people are going to walk out of here and not come back. And if I don't, then we go outside and talk it through with everyone else," Jackson said. "And I'll be honest with you, that's a longer conversation than this one, and the people you'll be having it with are less patient than I am." The machine near the hallway started its final cycle. The quiet tumbling of clothes almost done. Derek Vaughn looked at Emily Carter for a long moment. She looked back at him. She thought about Rosa, who had stopped coming because she felt unsafe. She thought about the elderly gentleman with the newspaper who had quietly left tonight without meeting her eyes. She thought about the 9 months of slow erosion, the customers drifting away, the late nights getting quieter, the back room filling up with things that didn't belong there, the feeling of her own space becoming foreign to her. She thought about the drawer at home and the months of documentation and the lawyer who'd been honest with her and the officer who hadn't come back. She thought about putting a red sign on the counter. She had almost done it twice. She was glad she hadn't because this was better. This was Derek making the choices that had brought him here. Derek choosing to escalate past every reasonable off-ramp. Derek arriving tonight with 5 men and a plan in meeting a situation he had not planned for. Derek looked down. He put Emily's phone back on the counter. He looked at the man near the door. The man unlocked it. And in that unlocking, in that small mechanical sound that was the reverse of the sound that had started all of this, something settled. Not exploded, not collapsed, not ended dramatically. Just settled the way a thing that has been held under pressure finally finds its level. Derek walked to the door. He stopped without turning around. "You'll hear from me," he said. "I'll be here," Emily said. "I'm here every day." Derek walked out. His men followed. The door swung shut behind them. Not locked, just closed. Emily stood behind her counter in the sudden ringing quiet of her laundromat and let out a breath she had been holding on and off for the better part of 4 months. Jackson walked to the dryer near the back wall and opened it. His clothes were done. He pulled them out and folded them with the efficient, unself-conscious movements of a man who had been doing his own laundry for a long time. Emily watched him fold a flannel shirt. "Are they really out there?" she said. "All those bikes?" "Yes," he said. "They came because you made a 4-second phone call." "They came because I asked," Jackson said. "That's what it means to ride together. Somebody needs you, you show up." Emily looked at her phone on the counter, picked it up, put it in her pocket. "I thought you were just a Tuesday regular," she said. Jackson tucked the flannel shirt into his canvas bag. "I am a Tuesday regular," he said. "Everything else is just part of who I am." He picked up the laundry bag, he picked up his empty coffee cup and carried it to the small trash can near the door because that was the kind of man he was, the kind who put his own trash away, even in someone else's building, in the middle of an unlikely and significant night. He stopped near the door. "The documentation you mentioned," he said, "the case you've been building." "Yes." "Keep building it," he said. "Tonight happened, but men like Derek don't stop because of one night. They stop because someone finishes what they started." Emily looked at him. "I know," she said. He nodded, pushed the door open. Outside, the sound of motorcycles filled the street. Not revving, just present. Idling. The sound of people who had come and were waiting to hear that the thing they had come for was resolved. Jackson stepped through the door. And Emily Carter stood alone in her laundromat. Her laundromat, hers. The one she had built from a broken building in a forgotten neighborhood with her own hands and her own stubbornness. In 12 years of showing up and listened to the sound of the engines outside and felt something she recognized from the early years, from the first time a customer had thanked her and meant it from the morning she had finally turned a profit after 18 months of losses. She felt like the place was hers again. Not because Derek was gone. He might come back. He had said so himself. But because she had stood behind her counter in the worst moment this business had ever seen, and she had not given an inch. Not one. She had reconciled her receipts and kept her glasses on her face and given Derek exactly as much of her attention as he had earned, which was not very much, and she had watched him walk out of a room that was and had always been and would always be hers. The last machine finished its cycle. The building went quiet. Emily put her reading glasses in her pocket. She picked up her pen. She opened the log she kept in the drawer under the counter, dates, times, descriptions, evidence, and she added tonight's entry in her careful, precise handwriting. She wrote down everything. She was not finished building. She had barely started. Derek Vaughn did not go home that night. Emily found that out later from a source she hadn't expected, in a way that confirmed what Jackson had told her standing near the door. With his laundry bag, men like Derek didn't stop because of one night. They recalibrated. They regrouped. They sat somewhere and thought hard about what had gone wrong and what they still had available to them and what the next move looked like from a different angle. Derek sat in a booth at an all-night diner 4 blocks from Silver Creek Laundry with his 2 most trusted people and a cup of coffee he barely touched, and ran the night backward from the end to the beginning, looking for the exact moment it had stopped going his way. He kept arriving at the same answer: Jackson Walker. Not the bikes outside, not the 30 or 40 members who had materialized on the street like they'd been waiting around the corner the whole time. The bikes were a consequence. The real problem was the man who had been sitting in that corner with a coffee cup and an expression of absolute calm, the man who had made 1 4-second phone call and then continued his laundry. The man whose presence in that room had changed the temperature of everything without him raising his voice or his hands or anything other than his own considerable unspoken weight. Derek did not know how to fight that. He knew how to fight anger. He knew how to fight fear and desperation and the kind of exhausted compliance that came from people who had been worn down past the point of resistance. Those were the conditions he created deliberately, the soil he grew his operations in. But calm, true calm, the kind that came from someone who had already assessed the worst possible version of this situation and decided they could handle it, that was different. That was something Derek had only encountered a handful of times in his life, and every time it had meant that he was in a room with someone who was operating from a place he couldn't reach. "We go at her differently," said the man across from him. His name was Colt, 29, the closest thing Derek had to a strategist. "We don't go back to the laundromat. That's their ground now. We hit her outside of it." "Define hit," Derek said. "Pressure, the business angle. Find out who she owes money to, who her suppliers are, whether there are any code violations in the building the city hasn't gotten around to. Everyone's got something. She's been running a clean operation for 12 years. Nobody runs a perfectly clean operation for 12 years. There's always something." Derek thought about the way Emily had sat behind her counter and put her reading glasses back on while he stood 3 feet away with her phone in his hand. He thought about the word documentation in the specific way she had said it, flat and certain, not as a threat but as a fact, the way someone states a thing they have already prepared for rather than a thing they're saying to scare you. "She's got evidence," he said. Colt was quiet for a moment. "How much?" "4 months worth. She mentioned security footage, written records, copies in multiple locations." Derek put his coffee down. "She was building a case. While I was being patient with her, she was building a case." "She give any of it to the cops yet?" "She said the cops weren't helpful in March. Lawyer either." Derek picked up his coffee again. "Which means she's been sitting on it, waiting." "Waiting for what?" Derek didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about a Jackson Walker, about the way the man had stood up from that chair slowly, without urgency, without performance, and the room had changed, about the 4-second phone call, about 30 motorcycles materializing on a street at midnight because someone had said 3 words into a phone. "She wasn't waiting for the calm," Derek said finally. "She was waiting for the right moment, for us to give her something more." Colt leaned back. "So tonight I handed her the escalation she needed," Derek said. "Locked door, 5 men demanded the business. She's got all of that on camera, all of it on record. Whatever she had before tonight was a complaint. What she has now is a case." The booth was quiet. The diner was mostly empty, a cook visible through the pass-through, a woman in her 60s nursing tea near the window, a young man at the counter with headphones. Normal late-night quiet, the kind of ordinariness that felt strange to Derek right now, the way the mundane world continues around the edges of the moments that crack things open. "So we move fast," Colt said, "before she files anything, before she takes it anywhere." "We can't touch her," Derek said. "That makes it worse." "I didn't say touch her. I know what you mean, and I'm saying no. She's already got the angels involved. We lay a hand on anything connected to her, and we're not dealing with evidence anymore. We're dealing with a different kind of problem." Derek shook his head. "We need the documentation. Whatever she's collected, wherever it is, we find it, and we find what it actually contains, and we assess what our actual exposure is. And the copy she mentioned, the one with someone she trusts." Derek looked at his coffee. "That's the part I need to think about," he said. Emily didn't sleep. She sat in the small office at the back of her house with the locked drawer open and the documentation spread across her desk, and went through everything she had with fresh eyes, the eyes of someone who had just watched 4 months of patient, careful work get tested in real time and had seen it hold. It had held. That was the thing she kept coming back to, the fact that was both relieving and frightening. The case she'd been building had held up against the pressure of the actual moment. When Derek had said she had no options and was alone, and the decision was already made, she had been able to tell him truthfully that she had documentation in 3 locations that she had been recording for 4 months, that she had copies with someone she trusted, and all of it was true. And the weight of its truth had been visible on his face when it landed. But Derek was smart. She had never let herself forget that. And a smart man who had just been outmaneuvered would spend the night figuring out how to reverse the situation, and by morning he would have a plan she hadn't anticipated. She needed to move faster than his plan. She looked at her phone. 2:14 a.m. She opened her contacts and found the number she'd put in for Jackson Walker 3 weeks ago. She stared at it. She thought about what he'd said before he left. Keep building it tonight happened, but men like Derek don't stop because of one night. She put the phone down without calling. Not because she didn't need help, because the kind of help she needed right now was not the kind Jackson could provide. What she needed was a prosecutor or someone who knew one. What she needed was for the documentation she'd been building to reach the right hands before Derek could assess his exposure and do something about it. She pulled up her laptop and started composing an email to her lawyer. She wrote, "I need to meet with you first thing tomorrow morning. Tonight, Derek Vaughn came to the laundromat with 5 men, locked the door, took my phone, and formally demanded I hand over the business. I have all of this on security camera footage. I have 4 months of prior documentation. I believe I now have enough for criminal charges. Please call me as early as you're able." She sent it at 2:21 a.m. She did not expect a response until morning. She got one at 2:34. Her lawyer, Patricia Hale, 51, a woman who had built her practice on exactly this kind of case, and who had told Emily in March that the evidence wasn't quite there yet, but who had also told her to keep documenting, Patricia responded with 4 words and a time. 7 a.m. My office. Emily exhaled. She closed the laptop. She did not sleep, but she lay down, and in the lying down, there was something that was the beginning of rest, the specific physical surrender of a body that has been running on adrenaline for hours and has just received permission in the form of a meeting time to stop running quite so fast. Her phone rang at 6:15. She answered before the second ring. It was a number she didn't recognize. Local area code. Emily Carter. Yes. This is Detective Ray Okafor, Silver Creek Police Department. I was given your name by someone who suggested I might want to speak with you about a situation involving your business. Emily sat up. Who gave you my name? She said. A pause. I'd rather discuss that in person if you're available this morning. I understand you may have documentation that's relevant to an investigation we've been building separately. I think it would be worth our time to compare notes. Emily looked at the clock. 6:17. I have a meeting with my lawyer at 7, she said. Your lawyer should be there, Detective Okafor said. In fact, I'd prefer it. She called Patricia from the car on the way. Patricia listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Emily had always appreciated about her. A detective called you at 6 in the morning, Patricia said when Emily finished. Yes, separately building investigation. Wants to compare notes with your documentation. That's what he said. A brief silence on Patricia's end. Emily, she said carefully, do you know who gave him your name? He wouldn't say. Another pause, this one longer. I think I might, Patricia said. Come to my office. We'll sort this out together. The meeting started at 7:08. Detective Ray Okafor was 44, lean, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a folder on the table in front of him that was thicker than Emily expected. He shook Emily's hand and then Patricia's and sat across from them with the specific settled patience of a man who had been waiting a long time for a particular kind of morning. How familiar are you with Derek Vaughn's broader operation, he said. What I've seen of it from my laundromat, Emily said. Okafor opened his folder. Derek Vaughn has been under departmental investigation for 14 months, he said. Not just for what he's doing to small businesses, that's a piece of the bit. He's connected to a distribution network operating across 3 counties using commercial front businesses to move product and manage cash. Our problem has been establishing the local nexus. We know the network, we know the general pattern, but tying it to specific locations with specific evidence admissible in court has been, he paused, choosing the word carefully, a process. Emily looked at Patricia. Patricia was writing something in her notepad. What kind of evidence do you have? Patricia said to the detective. Surveillance, financial records, 2 witnesses who are currently uncooperative. Okafor looked at Emily. What kind of evidence do you have? Emily took a breath, then she told him. She told him about the first conversation with Derek in January and the storage room arrangement, and the escalating presence, and the customers who stopped feeling safe, in the specific careful way Derek had always stayed just below the line of anything overtly criminal. She told him about the documentation, the dates and times, and descriptions and photographs in the security footage from every camera in the building, 4 months of footage, every visit, every person who came and went through her back hallway, Every night, the storage room was accessed. Okafor stopped writing at some point. He just listened. When Emily finished, the room was quiet for almost 10 seconds. "You have 4 months of security footage from the cameras inside the laundromat," Okafor said. "Yes, including footage of the people coming and going through the back entrance." "Yes, the cameras cover the main floor and both entry points. The back hallway camera was installed when I first opened the business. It's not visible from the storage room itself, but it covers everyone who enters and exits the hallway." Okafor took off his reading glasses from the top of his head and put them on his face and looked at Emily with an expression that was controlled enough that she couldn't read it clearly, but that contained beneath the professionalism something that looked like the specific relief of a person who has just been handed the piece they've been missing. "Who gave you my name?" Emily said again. Okafor considered. "The call came through a liaison contact," he said. "Someone who monitors certain community situations and flags them when they overlap with active investigations." He paused. The name that came attached to the tip was Jackson Walker. Emily sat with that for a moment. Patricia stopped writing. "He called the police," Emily said. "He called someone who called us," Okafor said. "He's been careful about the distinction. Mr. Walker has a complicated history with law enforcement, as you may know, and let's say he's particular about how he engages with official channels. But he was specific about one thing." "What?" "He said the woman running Silver Creek Laundry had been building a case alone for 4 months, and that last night something happened to him that made it urgent. He said, and I'm quoting here." Okafor glanced at a note. "She's been doing the right thing the whole time, and she deserves to have someone finally do right by her." Emily pressed her lips together. She looked at the table. She did not cry in Patricia's office at 7 in the morning in front of the detective she had just met. She made a decision not to, and she held to it. But it was a harder decision than most of the ones she'd made in the past 12 years. "What happens now?" Patricia said. "Now," Okafor said, "Ms. Carter shares her documentation with us under a formal arrangement that protects her interests, and we integrate it with our existing investigation, and we move toward charges." He looked at Emily. "Last night, the locked door, the demand, the explicit statement about taking over the business, all of that is on your cameras." "All of it," Emily said. 5 men, Derek present, him taking your phone." "Yes." "Emily," Patricia said quietly, "that's extortion. What happened last night on its own, separate from the 4 months, that's a criminal charge." Okafor nodded. "Combined with what we already have on the distribution network," he said, "and the footage you've been sitting on for 4 months, he paused. "We're not talking about an intimidation charge. We're talking about organized criminal enterprise, multiple counts, the kind of thing that doesn't result in a fine and a suspended sentence." Emily thought about Derek in the diner 4 blocks away, sitting with his coffee and his strategist, running the night backward, looking for the moment it stopped going his way. She thought about him deciding that the move was to find her documentation and assess his exposure before she could do anything with it. She thought about the fact that while he was doing that, she had already given it to a detective. "How fast can you move?" she said. "With what you're giving us," Okafor said, "I can have a warrant application in front of a judge by this afternoon." Emily looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at Emily. "Do it," Emily said. She was back at the laundromat by 9. She unlocked the front door and turned on the lights and started the first wash cycle of the day and made a fresh pot of coffee and stood behind her counter and opened for business exactly the way she had opened for business every morning for 12 years. The first customer came in at 9:14, a young mother with 2 children and an enormous bag of children's clothes. Emily helped her sort the colors from the whites and showed the older child how to put the coins in the machine and gave the younger one a sticker from the small stash she kept under the counter for exactly this purpose. Normal. Mundanely completely normal. At 9:40, Rosa came in. Not with laundry, just Rosa, her longtime customer, the one who'd called in April to say she'd felt unsafe and switched to the place on Oak Street. Rosa came in with her hands in her coat pockets and stood just inside the door and looked at Emily across the counter. "I heard something happened last night," Rosa said. "Where did you hear that?" "Maria called me this morning, said she'd come by for a pickup, and something felt wrong inside. She was worried about you." Emily remembered Maria's voice through the locked door, the specific pause in the middle of her response. "I'll come back in the morning." The message inside the message. "Maria called someone," Emily said slowly. She called me. I called 3 people. I don't know who they called. Rosa shrugged. Word gets around. This neighborhood talks. She looked at Emily carefully. Are you okay? I'm okay, Emily said. What happened? Emily thought about how to answer. She thought about Okafor and the warrant application and Patricia at her desk. And she thought about Derek in the diner running his backward calculation. And she thought about what it would mean to say too much right now before anything was finalized. Derek came with some people last night and made some demands, she said carefully. He left. Things are being addressed. Rosa studied her. Addressed how? The right way, Emily said. Was I meant that? Finally. Rosa looked at her for another moment. Then she walked to the counter and put both hands on it the way you put your hands on a surface when you want to make clear you mean what you're about to say. I should have stayed, Rosa said, in April, when I felt uncomfortable and left. I should have stayed and I should have been a witness and I should have told you what I saw instead of just switching laundromats. Rosa, no, I mean it. I've been feeling guilty about it since April. Rosa's voice was tight. You were in here alone dealing with those people in the neighborhood, we all just stepped back. Because it was easier. Because none of us wanted trouble. Emily looked at her. You had a right to feel safe, Emily said, and you didn't. The question sat between them. I had a right to feel safe in my own business, Emily said finally. And I'm going to. She met Rosa's eyes. But I don't blame you for protecting yourself. I really don't. None of what happened here was caused by the people who left. It was caused by the people who came in to take something that wasn't theirs. Rosa wiped her eyes quickly and patiently, the way someone wipes away something they didn't plan to show. Can I do anything? She said. Come back on Saturdays, Emily said. That's enough. Rosa laughed a short, watery sound. I'll be here this Saturday, she said. She left. Emily turned back to the counter and picked up her pen, and for a moment she had to stop and breathe through the specific weight of the morning, the weight of all of it the night before, and the meeting at Patricia's office, and Rosa with her hands on the counter, and the young mother with the 2 children, and the sticker, and the coins in the machine, all of it pressing on her at once with the accumulated force of something that had been moving for a very long time. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize, different from Okafor's. She answered. Ms. Carter. The voice was male, older, calm, not a voice she recognized. Yes. My name is Frank. I'm calling on behalf of some people connected to a mutual friend of ours. I understand you had a difficult evening. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Who's the mutual friend? She said. Goes by Grizzly, Frank said. She let out a slow breath. Okay, she said. Frank, what can I do for you? Actually, we were calling to see what we might do for you. There are a couple of things we've become aware of that we thought you should know. A pause. First, Derek Vaughn is not going to come back to the laundromat directly. We've been informed that after last night, he and his people are treating your location as, let's say, too complicated. That's good for you in the short term. And the long term, that's the second thing. Derek has someone working for him, not Colt. The other one, younger, goes by Drez. Drez has been talking to someone in your building's management company. He's looking for lease information, whether you have any violations, whether there are grounds for someone to apply pressure from the property side rather than directly. Emily felt cold. Who at the management company? She said. We don't have a name yet, but we're working on it. Frank, Emily said carefully. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Last night, Jackson called the police. He called a liaison contact who passed information to a detective who reached out to me this morning. Jackson did that while I was still locking up the laundromat. That sounds right, Frank said. He didn't tell me he was going to do that. No. And now you're calling to tell me about the lease angle. Yes. Emily looked at the young mother helping her older child switch laundry from washer to dryer, at the normal, quiet, ordinary morning proceeding around her. How long has Jackson been keeping an eye on this situation? She said. Frank was quiet for a moment. Since February, he said. Since about 3 weeks after he first came in on a Tuesday night and noticed what was happening. Emily closed her eyes. February. She had first tried to address the storage room with Derek in February. She had first felt the situation tip from uncomfortable to genuinely threatening in February. And since February, Jackson Walker had been coming in every Tuesday, watching and doing things she hadn't known about, building his own awareness of the situation, making his own connections, preparing his own response, Not because she'd asked him to, and not because there was anything in it for him, but because he had walked into a place and seen something wrong and decided privately that he was going to be there when it mattered. She had thought she was alone. She had been alone in the sense that mattered most to her. She had done the work herself, built the case herself, stood her ground herself. None of that was fiction. None of that had been handed to her, but she had not been unwatched. And right now at 10:03 in the morning, with a warrant application in front of a judge and a detective with her 4 months of footage and a lawyer who had been ready for this since March, with the neighborhood beginning to talk, and Rosa coming back on Saturday, and a man named Frank telling her about the lease angle before Derek could execute it right now, standing behind the counter of her laundromat, with a pen in her hand and the sounds of machines running all around her. Emily Carter understood something she had been too busy surviving to see clearly. She had not been fighting alone. She had just been the one at the front. "Frank," she said. "Yes, Miss Carter? The person at the management company. I need a name if you get one. And I need it before Derek's people make any kind of move there. We'll get it to you. Thank you. Miss Carter Grizzly wanted me to tell you something." "What?" Frank paused. "He said you did everything right. He said a lot of people in your position would have given up in February or tried to handle it in a way that made things worse or waited too long to act. He said you didn't. He said what happened last night happened because you were ready for it." Emily stood behind her counter and listened to this and felt the words land somewhere underneath her sternum, in the place where the 12 years of this building lived, in the place where she carried the weight of every hard decision she'd made for this business. "Tell him thank you," she said quietly. "He also said to tell you he'll be in Tuesday." Emily almost laughed. "His laundry's not going to wash itself," she said. After she hung up, she stood for a moment with her hand on the counter and ran through what she knew. Derek wasn't coming back directly, too complicated, too much attention on the location. But Drez was working the lease angle, which meant Derek had assessed his situation and concluded that his best move was a flanking maneuver through the property side, finding a way to make her tenancy in the building untenable without coming back to the place himself. That was smart. That was the kind of smart she had expected from him once he'd had time to think. She needed to move faster than his thinking. She called Patricia. "Derek's pivoting," she said when Patricia answered. "He's got someone looking into the lease, trying to find violations or grounds for pressure from the property management side." A brief pause. "How do you know this?" "Source I trust. The same source who got Okafor's office involved, connected to him." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Emily could hear the sound of papers on Patricia's end, the familiar sound of a lawyer already 2 steps ahead of the conversation. "Your lease is clean," Patricia said. "I reviewed it in March. No violations on record that I found, and you own your equipment outright, which means the machines themselves aren't part of any lease dispute." Another pause. "But if someone inside the management company is willing to manufacture something, can they?" "It would be difficult. It would also be illegal. But difficult and illegal haven't stopped Derek before." Patricia's voice was steady, the steadiness of someone who had been in this work long enough to be unsurprised. "I'll call your property management contact this morning. Get everything formally documented, the current state of your lease compliance, any open items, anything that could be twisted. If there's someone inside that organization working with Derek's people, we want it on record that we made contact before they made their move." "That's what I was thinking," Emily said. Emily. "Yes, you're thinking 3 moves ahead." "I've had 4 months of practice," Emily said. "Okafor called me an hour ago," Patricia said. "The warrant application is moving faster than he expected. He had a judge review it this morning." Emily straightened. "How fast?" "He's confident about this afternoon," Patricia said. "If the judge signs this morning, they could move on the storage room by noon." The storage room. The boxes that had been sitting in the back of her laundromat for 4 months, the contents she had never seen clearly, the thing Derek had needed badly enough to push an entire woman out of her own business to keep it. "What do they expect to find?" Emily said. "They're not telling me everything, but based on what Okafor said about the distribution network, and based on the pattern of who's been going in and out of that room according to your footage." Patricia paused. "Whatever's in there is the center of something larger than what you've seen." Emily looked toward the hallway, toward the back room. The door was closed the way it had always been closed when Derek's people weren't there. The ordinary-looking door to an ordinary-looking storage room in an ordinary laundromat that had been for 4 months the most dangerous square footage of her life. Patricia, she said, yes. When they open that room, when they find whatever they find, is my business protected? Can they tie the contents to me? Your documentation establishes that the room was occupied against your will, against your repeated attempts to terminate the arrangement, and that you were actively building a case and cooperating with law enforcement. Patricia's voice was firm. You are the victim here. Everything you've done, the way you've handled every step of this, has made that absolutely clear. Emily let the breath go. Okay, she said. Go run your laundromat, Patricia said. I'll call you the minute anything changes. Emily put the phone in her pocket. She looked around the main floor. 3 washers running. The young mother and her kids were gone, replaced by an older gentleman in a hat who was reading a paperback near the window, and a pair of college-age women sorting a massive pile of clothes. Normal. Her Tuesday, her Wednesday, her Thursday, her everyday sounds and rhythms, and the specific ordinary music of a place that cleaned things and kept them moving. She went behind the counter. She picked up her pen. And at 11:47, while she was helping the older gentleman figure out why his dryer cycle had stopped early, and while the college women were laughing about something on one of their phones, and while the machines kept their patient mechanical rhythm, her phone buzzed with a text from a number she now recognized as Frank's. It was 2 words and a first name. Name is Gary. Gary. Someone named Gary at her property management company talking to Derek's people, looking for the angle that would let them push her out through the property side instead of the direct way that hadn't worked last night. She typed back, thank you. Then she called Patricia. Then she texted Okafor's number with the name. She did all of this in about 90 seconds, standing behind her counter, in her laundromat, her pen still in her other hand. At 12:22, Patricia called her. Gary Simmons, Patricia said. He's an assistant manager at your property company. I just spoke to the senior property manager who was, she paused, choosing words carefully, surprised and concerned. He's pulling Gary's communications files right now. Does Derek know we know? Emily said. Not yet, but Gary is probably going to realize something is happening soon. These things move fast once they start. How fast? As of 20 minutes ago, Okafor has his warrant, Patricia said. Emily went still. They're moving on the storage room, Patricia said. Right now, they went in through the back of the building. They didn't want to come through your front floor during business hours. Emily looked toward the hallway, toward the door. Somewhere behind that door on the other side of the ordinary wall of her ordinary laundromat, detectives were opening boxes that Derek Vaughn had been willing to take her entire business to protect. She put her hand flat on the counter. She breathed. Around her, the machines kept turning. A woman came in through the front door with a basket of laundry and asked if the large capacity washers on the right side were available. Third one from the end is free, Emily said. Her voice came out steady. She had gotten very good in 12 years at keeping her voice steady. At 1:14, Okafor called. Ms. Carter, he said, I want to update you on what we found. Go ahead, she said. The pause before he spoke was 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Emily understood that what he was about to tell her was going to be bigger than she had prepared herself for. She was right. The storage room, Okafor said carefully, contained materials consistent with a distribution staging operation, product cache, and documentation connecting the Silver Creek location to at least 4 other sites across the county. This is not a small operation, Miss Carter. What was in your back room was the physical nexus of something that's been moving through this part of the county for at least 2 years. Emily pressed her hand harder against the counter. 2 years, she said. Derek Vaughn didn't come to your laundromat because it was convenient, Okafor said. He came because it was central, because of where it sits geographically, because of the cash flow pattern that a laundry business provides, because of the specific configuration of your back hallway, which allows access without going through the main floor. He paused. He planned this location specifically. He had been watching it before he ever walked through your door. Emily felt the room tilt slightly. Not physically. Something internal. The specific vertigo of learning that something you thought happened to you was in fact aimed at you deliberately from before the beginning. He targeted me, she said. He targeted the building, Okafor said, and you were in it. She thought about January. Derek with 1 bag of laundry, polite and ordinary, paying in cash, sitting in the corner and scrolling his phone. She had thought he looked harmless. She had watched him study the cameras and the exits and the pattern of who came and went, and she had noticed it and filed it, but she had interpreted it as the wariness of someone involved in low-level street dealing, not as the surveying of a man who had already decided that her building was going to become part of a multi-county operation. She had been right to be suspicious. She had been right about everything. She had just not been right about the scale. "What happens to Derek?" she said. It was not quite a question. "With what we found today, combined with our existing investigation and your 4 months of documentation, we're looking at charges that will take years to untangle in court." Okafor's voice was measured but not quite neutral. There was something underneath it, the specific tone of someone doing work they believe in, arriving at a result they've been working toward. "He's going to know by end of day that his staging location has been compromised. He's going to know that we have physical evidence. And based on the pattern we've seen with cases like this, he will either run or he will immediately contact a lawyer and stop all activity." "Will you be able to charge him before he runs?" "We have a warrant for his arrest," Okafor said. "We're executing it this afternoon." Emily stood behind her counter in her laundromat on a Wednesday at 1:14 in the afternoon and listened to this and felt something move through her that was larger than relief and more complicated than victory, and not quite any of the emotions she had imagined she might feel when this ended, if it ended, which for 4 months she had not fully let herself believe it would. She thought about the locked door at 11:36 the night before. She thought about Derek picking up her phone. She thought about him saying, "From now on, this place works for us." She thought about 12 years. She thought about the receipt she'd been tallying when he walked in, the cold coffee, the reading glasses on her nose, the small, ordinary, ongoing business of running a place she had built herself. "Ms. Carter," Okafor said. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," Emily said. "I'll call you when the arrest is made." "Thank you, Detective." "No," he said. "Thank you. You did this. You built the case. We're just the ones who got to close it." She hung up. She stood there for a moment. Then she picked up her pen, and she went back to work. Okafor called at 3:47 p.m. Emily was helping a woman untangle a knot of sheets from a dryer drum when the phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She held up one finger to the woman, stepped toward the back counter, and answered. "It's done," Okafor said. "Derek Vaughn was taken into custody 40 minutes ago. He was at a property on the east side. We believe it was a secondary staging location. He did not resist." Emily put her free hand flat on the counter. "Colt," she said, "detained for questioning. We're working on formal charges for him as well. The evidence from your storage room connects both of them directly to the distribution network." A pause. "There are going to be additional arrests across the county over the next 48 hours. This is a larger operation than we initially communicated to you this morning, and the material we found in your building is Miss Carter. I want to be straightforward with you. What was in your back room is going to be the centerpiece of a prosecution that has been 14 months in the building. You gave us what we needed to close it." Emily looked up from the counter. The woman with the tangled sheets was watching her with mild curiosity. Across the floor, the college women from the morning were replaced by a teenage boy eating chips near Machine 4 and an older couple working quietly together, folding a mountain of laundry. The afternoon light came through the front windows. The machines kept their rhythm. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. Everything was completely different. "Gary Simmons," Emily said. "Sim." "The property management contact Derek's people were working. We spoke with him about 2 hours ago," Okafor said. "He's cooperating. It appears Derek's people approached him 3 weeks ago before last night, before any of this came to a head, and offered him money to flag any lease violations or code issues in your building, and to alert them if you filed any formal complaints through property management channels. He agreed. He did. He's now reconsidering that decision fairly urgently. Is he going to face charges? That depends on the depth of his cooperation. But yes, there's exposure there." Okafor's voice was even professional. "I want to be honest with you about one more thing. Derek Vaughn is going to have a very good defense attorney. These cases, organized crime cases with multiple jurisdictions and a lot of physical evidence, they don't resolve quickly. You should expect this to be a long process before any sentencing happens." "I know," Emily said. "You may be called as a witness." "I know that too. And it's possible that associates of Derek's people we haven't identified yet may be aware of your role in this. I'm not saying you're in danger. I'm saying you should be aware and you should call us if anything feels wrong. Emily thought about Frank's call that morning, about the network of awareness that had apparently surrounded this situation since February without her fully understanding it. She thought about Jackson Walker sitting in the corner of her laundromat every Tuesday watching Calibrating, connected to people who were watching things she couldn't see from behind her counter. I have people I can call, she said. A beat. Yes, Okafor said, and his voice held something that was not quite humor and not quite respect, but was somewhere in the specific territory between them. I imagine you do. After she hung up, Emily stood behind her counter for a full minute without moving, without doing anything, just standing in the middle of the afternoon in the middle of her laundromat while the machines ran, and the teenage boy ate his chips, and the older couple folded their laundry, and she let herself fully feel without managing it or setting it aside or filing it away for later, the weight of what had just happened. Derek Vaughn was in custody. The storage room had been cleared. The case she had built, alone in a locked drawer over 4 months of quiet and careful and sometimes terrifying work, had just become the centerpiece of a 14-month prosecution that was going to unfold in a courtroom. She had done that. Not alone, she understood that more clearly now than she ever had. But she had done the essential thing. She had stayed. She had documented. She had refused to give up the counter, refused to give up the keys, refused to give up 1 square inch of what was hers. And all the other pieces, Jackson's quiet observation, Patricia's readiness, Okafor's 14 months of investigative work, Frank's network and the name Gary that had arrived in 2 words on her phone, all of it had assembled around the core of what she had built. She exhaled. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. At 4:30, Patricia called. I spoke with Okafor, she said without preamble. They're moving faster than I've seen in a case like this. The DA's office is already involved. Apparently, your footage was Emily. They used the word comprehensive. One of the assistant DAs used the word comprehensive to describe 4 months of security camera footage from a laundromat, which is not a word those people use casually. Emily almost smiled. What does that mean for the timeline, she said. It means Derek isn't getting out on bail without a serious fight. It means the charges they're filing today are substantial enough that his lawyer is going to be working very hard just to get terms. It means, Patricia paused. It means you can breathe. Patricia, yes. What does it mean for the business? A slight pause on Patricia's end, not hesitation, more like the pause of someone choosing the order of things they want to say. The storage room has been cleared and formally released back to your use, Patricia said. Your lease is clean. I confirmed that with the senior property manager this morning before Gary Simmons became a separate problem. There is no active violation, no pending action, nothing Derek's people were able to plant before we got to it. She paused again. Silver Creek Laundry is yours. It was always yours, but now it's yours without anything in the back that shouldn't be there. Emily looked at the hallway. The door to the storage room was closed. Tomorrow morning she was going to open it and it was going to be empty. And she was going to put her cleaning supplies back in it and her spare parts inventory and the folding table she'd moved out in February to make room for whatever Derek had been storing there. She was going to take her storage room back. It was a small thing, the smallest physical thing in all of this. She had been looking forward to it more than she could easily explain. Thank you, she said to Patricia, for this morning, for being ready. You gave me everything I needed to be ready, Patricia said. In March, when I told you to keep documenting, you did. Most people don't. Most people get tired or scared, or they try to handle it in ways that complicate the legal situation. You didn't do any of that. You just kept building it quietly exactly the way it needed to be built. Emily thought about sitting at her desk at 2 a.m. with the locked drawer open and the documentation spread out and the lawyer's response arriving in 4 words in a meeting time. 7 a.m., my office. I had good guidance, Emily said. You had good instincts, Patricia corrected. I guided, you executed. After she hung up, the afternoon moved in the particular way that afternoons move, after significant things slower than the morning quieter, with more space in it for the mind to do the work the body had been too busy for. Customers came and went. Emily helped a man with the oversized load settings on the commercial washer. She restocked the detergent dispenser. She made a fresh pot of coffee. At 5:15, a woman came in that Emily recognized but couldn't immediately place. Middle 50s, gray-streaked hair, pulled back reading glasses on a chain around her neck. The specific look of someone who is used to moving through the world with purpose and has temporarily slowed down because she has arrived where she meant to be. The woman stood inside the door and looked at Emily. "You're Emily Carter," she said. "I am. My name is Diane. This is going to sound strange. My son is one of the men who was in here last night." The laundromat went very quiet in Emily's internal experience, even though the machines kept running and the two other customers in the room kept moving. "Which one?" Emily said. Her voice was flat, not hostile, but careful. "The one near the door," Diane said. "His name is Marcus. He's 24. He's been running with Derek's people for about 8 months. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I've been trying to get him out of it for 6 of those 8 months. I didn't know how deep it had gotten until last night happened, and Marcus called me at midnight and I could hear how scared he was, and I realized—" She stopped again. "I realized it had gotten a lot further than I thought." Emily looked at her. "Why are you here?" Emily said. "Because Marcus told me what happened. He told me about the woman who stood behind the counter and didn't give an inch and kept her reading glasses on while Derek stood there trying to intimidate her." Diane looked at Emily with an expression that was layered and complicated. "He said he'd never seen anyone do that. He said it was the first time he thought maybe the people he was working for weren't the most powerful people in the room." Emily set her pen down. "Is Marcus talking to the police?" she said. Diane nodded. "His lawyer brought him in this afternoon. He's cooperating. He was a lookout, he wasn't involved in the distribution side. He ran messages, kept watch. His lawyer thinks cooperation will keep him out of serious charges." "That's between Marcus and the DA," Emily said carefully. "I know." Diane looked down for a moment, then up. "I came to apologize on behalf of Marcus, who wanted to come himself, but his lawyer advised against it until things are more settled. And on my own behalf, because he's my son, and what he did to you and to this place." She shook her head. Emily studied her. She thought about what Jackson had said months ago. Sometimes they just need someone to know they're not alone. She thought about Rosa wiping her eyes impatiently at the counter that morning. She thought about Maria's voice through the locked door, the pause in the middle, the message inside the message. She thought about all the different ways people had been watching this situation, connected to it, affected by it in ways that had been invisible to her until they stopped being invisible. "Tell Marcus," Emily said finally, "that what he does now matters more than what he did then. That's true for most people, most of the time." She paused. "And tell him to stay out of other people's businesses." Diane made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't. "I will," she said. "Thank you." She left. Emily picked her pen back up. The teenage boy near Machine 4 looked at her with frank curiosity. "What was that about?" he said. "Business," Emily said. "Looked heavy?" "It was," Emily said. "It's lighter now." At 6 o'clock, the evening crowd started coming in. This was the shift Emily had always loved best after the morning regulars. In the quiet afternoon, the evening brought the workers, the young families, the people who had been doing other things all day and had saved their laundry for the end of it. The floor filled with the sound of people talking, the percussion of coins and slots, the rhythm of the place doing exactly what it had been built to do. Emily moved through it the way she had moved through it for 12 years, helping with detergent, troubleshooting a dryer that was taking too long, making change from the register, remembering names, asking after children, doing the small daily work of making a place feel like it belonged to the people who used it. At 6:45, a man she didn't recognize came in and asked for Emily Carter. "That's me," she said. He was 30, professionally dressed, carrying a leather portfolio that looked out of place in a laundromat. "I'm a reporter," he said. "Local paper. I heard there was an incident here last night connected to an arrest made this afternoon. I'd like to ask you a few questions if you have a minute." Emily looked at him. She thought about Okafor's warning associates. She didn't know people in the network who were going to find out about her role. She thought about Patricia. She thought about what it meant to have this story become public and what that meant for her business and her safety in the prosecution that was just getting underway. "Not tonight," she said. "Miss Carter, this is a significant story." "I'm sure it is," she said. "Call my lawyer. Her name is Patricia Hale." She wrote the number on a receipt slip and pushed it across the counter. "She'll tell you what I can say and when." The reporter looked at the receipt slip. The arrest this afternoon, you were the one who provided the evidence. Call my lawyer, Emily said. He left. Emily picked up her phone and texted Patricia. Reporter came by. Sent him to you. Patricia responded in under a minute. Good call. I'll handle it. Don't talk to anyone in the press until we've discussed. Then 3 seconds later, you're going to be in the paper, Emily. You should know that. What you did is going to be a story. Emily looked at the text. She put her phone in her pocket. She helped the next person in line. At 7:30, the door opened and a man came in who was not carrying a laundry. He was 40, heavyset with a beard that was trying to be neat and not quite succeeding, and he looked around the laundromat like someone mapping an unfamiliar territory. He spotted Emily behind the counter and walked toward her with the purposeful, slightly awkward gait of someone who has decided to do something they have been putting off. I need to talk to the owner, he said. That's me, Emily said. He put his hands on the counter. My name's Pete. I own the diner 4 blocks up the 24-hour place on Garfield. Emily waited. I heard about what happened last night, Pete said. And then I heard about the arrest this afternoon, and I've been sitting in my diner all day trying to figure out if I should come here and talk to you, and I kept deciding no. And then I kept coming back to yes, and He stopped. Derek's people came to me in November, 7 months ago, made me the same kind of pitch they apparently made you. Emily's hands went still on the counter. What did you do? She said. Pete's jaw tightened. I said yes, he said. They're not using my storage. They wanted the diner for late-night meetings. Certain people coming in after close using the back room for conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. I looked the other way. They paid me a flat monthly. I told myself it was just meetings, just conversations, no product moving through my place. He looked at Emily. I've been telling myself that for 7 months. The laundromat was busy around them. People moving machines running the evening's ordinary chaos. Nobody was paying attention to the conversation at the counter. Why are you telling me this? Emily said. Because they arrested Derek today, Pete said. And I don't know how much they know about my place. And I've been sitting in that diner all day, being scared, and then I thought. He stopped again. I thought about what you did, about the fact that you didn't say yes. And I thought about 7 months of saying yes, and he looked at her with an expression that was complicated with shame and something that was trying to be braver than shame. I want to talk to whoever you talk to, he said, the detective. If I cooperate, if I tell them what I know about what happened in my back room, does that help me? Does that matter? Emily looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the people this had touched that she hadn't seen from behind her counter. Derek's network was not just her storage room. It was Pete's diner. It was the building that Gary Simmons worked in. It was the distribution network across 3 counties that Okafor had been building a case against for 14 months. It was Marcus, 24 years old, calling his mother at midnight because he was scared. It was a whole ecosystem she had been seeing only one corner of. She pulled out her phone. She pulled up Okafor's number. She turned the phone around and pushed it across the counter to Pete. Call him, she said. Tell him what you told me. Tell him everything, not the version where you minimize what you agreed to the actual version. Cooperation matters, but only if it's real. Pete looked at the phone. He looked at Emily. Will it help? He said again. I don't know, Emily said honestly. That's between you and the DA, but I know that sitting in your diner for 7 more months being scared is worse than making the call. Pete picked up her phone. He stepped away from the counter toward the quieter corner near Machine 7 Jackson's corner, though Pete didn't know that and made the call. Emily watched him from across the floor. She watched him start talking, then stop, then start again. She watched the specific physical shift that happens to a person's body when they stop carrying something alone, a releasing in the shoulders, a change in the way the breath moves. She recognized it. She had felt it herself this morning in Patricia's office, handing over 4 months of documentation to a detective who had said, "Those are the words I've been waiting to hear." At 8:15, Pete came back to the counter with her phone. He handed it back. He's sending someone to the diner tonight, he said. He wants everything every night I can remember, everyone I can describe all of it. Good, Emily said. He said you started this. He's being generous, Emily said. He said without your footage, the physical evidence from the storage room would have taken months to connect to the network. He said you compressed their timeline by 6 months. Emily put her phone in her pocket. You should get back to your diner, she said. They're coming tonight. Pete nodded. He started toward the door, then stopped. I should have said no in November, he said without turning around. Probably, Emily said. But you're saying something now. That counts. He left. Emily stood behind her counter and let the evening move around her and thought about networks. Not Derek's network, but the other kind. The kind that had assembled around this situation without being organized or directed or paid. Rosa and Maria and the neighborhood talking. Diane and her son Marcus at midnight on a phone. Pete sitting in his diner all day building up to a decision. Jackson in the corner every Tuesday since February. Frank with his 2-word text. Patricia ready at 7 in the morning. Okafor 14 months into a case that had just found its missing piece. All of them connected to this building, to this counter, to the woman standing behind it. She thought about what Derek had said the night before. You're alone. At 9 o'clock, the evening crowd thinned. At 9:30, the floor was down to 3 customers, and the machines were winding toward the end of their cycles. Emily was balancing the register when Jackson Walker walked in. He was not carrying laundry. It was Wednesday, not Tuesday. He came through the front door and walked to the counter and put his hands on it in the way people put their hands on something solid when they have been moving through an uncertain day and want the contact of something that holds. How are you doing, he said. Emily looked at him. You've been talking to Frank, she said. Frank reports in, Jackson said. It's part of what he does. I wanted to hear it from you. Emily thought about what to say. She went through the day in her mind, 2:21 a.m. sending the email. Okafor at 6:15, Patricia's office at 7, the warrant by noon, the arrest at 3:07, Pete in the corner with her phone, Diane at the door with her complicated eyes, the reporter she'd sent away the text from Patricia saying you're going to be in the paper. She thought about February, Jackson watching since February, Frank with the name Gary and the 2 words, the 4-second phone call and 30 motorcycles. Frank told me you've been watching this since February, she said. Jackson said nothing. You didn't tell me. No. Why not? He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, working his way toward the honest answer rather than the easy one. Because you were handling it, he said. You were doing everything right. You were building something that needed to be built without outside interference. And if I told you I was keeping an eye on things, you might have adjusted how you moved. Waited for me to weigh in before making a decision. Look to me instead of to yourself. He shook his head slightly. That would have been the wrong outcome. What you built the documentation, the 4 months, the way you handled last night that needed to be yours, completely yours. Emily looked at him. That's why you didn't tell me, she said slowly. You were capable, Jackson said. You just needed someone nearby in case capable wasn't quite enough. She stood with that for a moment, the specific feeling of being understood at a level that required someone to have been watching carefully for a long time. What if I'd needed you sooner, she said. Then I would have been there sooner, Jackson said simply. But you didn't. She looked down at the counter. He targeted the building before he ever walked in, she said. Okafor told me. He watched this place, identified it as a target, and then showed up with 1 bag of laundry like a customer. I know, Jackson said. You knew that in February? I suspected it in February, knew it by March. Emily processed this. And you, she stopped. Frank talked to Okafor's liaison before last night. Frank has conversations with various people, Jackson said carefully. He's good at it. Were you building your own case? Emily said. Parallel to mine? Jackson looked at her steadily. I was making sure that what you were building didn't exist in isolation, he said. That's different. Your documentation is yours. Your evidence is yours. The work is yours. I just made sure there were people who would recognize its value when the time came. He paused. Okafor had 14 months of investigation, and he was missing the local nexus. You had 4 months of documentation, and you were a single woman fighting a legal system that wasn't moving fast enough. Those 2 things needed to find each other. Frank helped them find each other. Emily looked at him for a long time. You could have told me, she said. I could have, he agreed, but you didn't because you were afraid I'd rely on it. I was afraid you'd feel less alone, Jackson said. Which sounds unkind. It isn't meant to be. But the way you moved through those 4 months, the documentation, the lawyer, the self-reliance, the refusal to give 1 inch at the counter last night, that comes from a person who believes they have to do it themselves. I didn't want to take that from you. He held her eyes. because that belief is why you won. Emily stood with that. The machines finished their cycles. The last 3 customers collected their laundry and filed out, nodding at Emily ordinary as any other closing time. The front door swung shut. The laundromat was empty. Just Emily behind the counter and Jackson on the other side of it, in the quiet of a place that had been through an extraordinary 2 days and was now at 9:53 on a Wednesday night, simply a laundromat again. "I'm going to be in the paper," Emily said. "Probably. Patricia says I should control the narrative. Tell my version before someone else tells a version of it." "Patricia's right," Jackson said. "I don't love the idea of a story," Emily said. "I didn't do this to be a story." "No," Jackson said. "You did it to keep your laundromat." He looked around the floor, at the machines, the plastic chairs, the framed opening day photographs she had put back on the counter after Derek had handled it. "How's the building feel tonight?" Emily looked around. She thought about the storage room door closed and empty now. She thought about the morning when she was going to open it and put her things back in it. She thought about Rosa on Saturday. She thought about the folding table she was going to move back in. "It feels like mine," she said. Jackson nodded. "Good," he said. He moved toward the door. "Jackson," Emily said. He stopped. "Tuesday," she said. "Your regular wash. You're going to keep coming." It was not quite a question. He looked back at her. "My clothes aren't going to wash themselves," he said. He went out. Emily locked the door behind him, not the way Derek had locked it, not the sound of someone claiming something, the sound of a woman securing what belonged to her at the end of a day that had asked a great deal of her and gotten everything it asked for. She stood in the quiet of her laundromat. She thought about Pete and his diner with Okafor's people telling everything. She thought about Marcus cooperating with his lawyer. She thought about Gary Simmons at the property management company, pulling communication files, reconsidering his choices. She thought about Derek in custody and Colt being questioned in the distribution network across 3 counties, being mapped and documented and unraveled by people who now had everything they needed to unravel it. She thought about the storage room. She walked to the hallway. She put her hand on the storage room door. She turned the handle and pushed it open. It was empty. Every box, every piece of equipment, every trace of what had been there, gone in evidence bags in a facility, somewhere being processed by people building the case that was going to end Derek Vaughn's operation for a very long time. Emily stood in the doorway of her empty storage room and let the emptiness be exactly what it was. Just space. Her space. She closed the door. She went back to the counter. She opened the log in the drawer underneath. Dates, times, descriptions, the long, careful record of 4 months she had built, in the belief that it would matter, in the knowledge that she had no guarantee that it would. And she wrote tonight's entry. Derek Vaughn arrested 3:07 p.m. Warrant executed, storage room cleared. Patricia confirmed lease clean. Gary Simmons cooperating. Pete from Garfield Diner initiated cooperation independently. Reporter redirected to Patricia. Jackson came by at 9 p.m., not a Tuesday. She paused. She added one more line. Building feels like mine again. She closed the log. She closed the drawer. She turned off the front lights, one bank at a time, the way she did every night, moving through the space she had built and kept and refused to give up through 12 years of difficulty and 4 months of something that had been genuinely dangerous. And one extraordinary night at 11:36 when a man had locked her door and picked up her phone and told her the place worked for him now. The last light went off. Emily stood in the dark of her laundromat for just a moment, not because she was afraid of it, not because she needed to, just because she could, because the dark of this building at the end of this night was hers, and standing in it was something she had not taken for granted since January, and she was not going to take it for granted now. She picked up her bag. She walked to the front door. She stepped outside. She locked the door behind her. And she went home for the first time in 4 months without the specific, hollow weight of dread she had been carrying since a man with one bag of laundry had smiled at her and paid in cash and started watching the exits. The street was quiet. The city was its ordinary self. Above her, the night was clear and full of stars that didn't know or care about Derek Vaughn or Patricia Hale or 14 months of investigation or 4 months of documentation or a woman who had stood her ground so completely and so quietly that the ground itself had become her greatest weapon. They just burned. Emily walked home under them. She was not alone. She had never been as alone as it had looked. But she had also never been more herself than she had been in those 4 months. More deliberate, more stubborn, more certain of what mattered and what she was willing to fight for, one receipt and one camera and one locked drawer at a time. Tomorrow she was going to open the storage room and put her cleaning supplies back. That was enough. That was in the way that the smallest true things often are everything. The story ran on a Thursday. Page 3 of the Silver Creek Gazette, below the fold with a headline that Patricia had reviewed and approved before the paper went to print. Local business owners, 4-month evidence trail breaks, multi-county crime network. Emily had not given the interview herself. Patricia had handled it carefully, providing a written statement and selected verified facts, and keeping Emily's direct quotes to a minimum that she could stand behind in court if necessary. The reporter had pushed for more. Patricia had given him exactly as much as served Emily's interests, and not one word beyond it. Emily read the article at her kitchen table Thursday morning with her coffee and her reading glasses, and the particular feeling of seeing your own life described in someone else's words, which is never quite right and never quite wrong, but always slightly strange, like looking at a photograph of yourself taken from an angle you don't normally see. The article was accurate. The facts were correct. The timeline matched what had actually happened. But reading it, Emily felt the gap between what the article contained and what the article couldn't contain, the 2:21 a.m. email, the specific weight of a locked drawer, the way she had put her reading glasses back on, while Derek stood at her counter, the sound of 30 motorcycles arriving at midnight, Jackson Walker draining his coffee cup before he stood up, the 2 words Frank had texted her, name is Gary. None of that was in the article. All of that was the actual story. She folded the paper and finished her coffee and drove to the laundromat. The first customer she served that morning, a woman named Carolyn, who had been coming every Thursday for 7 years, put a copy of the Gazette on the counter and looked at Emily with an expression that was warm and a little awed and trying not to make too much of itself. That's you, Carolyn said. That's me, Emily said. You did all that by yourself. Emily thought about Patricia, about Jackson, about Okafor and Frank and Rosa, and Maria's voice through the locked door, about Pete in the corner of her laundromat on his phone to the detective. Not exactly, Emily said, but I started it. Carolyn looked at her for another moment. I saw those men, she said quietly, the ones who used to come. I stopped coming for about 6 weeks in March. I felt bad about it afterward. Don't, Emily said. Rosa said the same thing. I mean it don't. But you were here alone. I know, Emily said, and I handled it. That's the part that matters. Carolyn picked up her laundry bag and moved toward machine 6, her usual machine, and Emily watched her go with the specific feeling of a place returning to its own rhythms, its own familiar orbits. The patterns that a healthy business develops over years, when the people who use it feel safe enough to have habits. By 10 o'clock, 4 more people had mentioned the article. By noon, the floor was busier than it had been on any Wednesday in the past 5 months. At 12:30, a man Emily didn't recognize came in carrying 2 large duffel bags of laundry and asked if the big commercial washers on the left side were available, and spent the next hour and 45 minutes doing his laundry without incident and paid for his machines with a credit card and thanked Emily on the way out. Completely ordinary. The kind of transaction that had happened 10,000 times in 12 years and that Emily had stopped noticing. She noticed it now. She noticed it because it had been a long time since a stranger walking in with large bags had felt like an ordinary transaction, and noticing that it felt ordinary again was itself a kind of marker, a before and after a line between the version of this place that had existed for 4 months and the version that was slowly, imperfectly, genuinely returning. At 1:15, her phone rang with a number she recognized as the DA's office. She stepped to the back counter. Ms. Carter, this is Assistant District Attorney Keisha Broward. I've been assigned to the Vaughn case. I wanted to introduce myself and give you a brief update on where things stand. Thank you for calling, Emily said. Derek Vaughn appeared in court this morning for his arraignment. He was denied bail based on the scope of the charges and the evidence presented. He will remain in custody pending trial. A pause. Colt Mercer, the man you knew as Derek's strategist, has been charged separately. He's currently in discussions with our office about a cooperation agreement, which if accepted would significantly accelerate our ability to prosecute the network charges. Is the cooperation genuine? Emily said. That remains to be assessed, Broward said. But the physical evidence is strong enough that his cooperation, while useful, is not essential. Your footage and documentation form the backbone of the case against Vaughn directly. Emily leaned against the back counter. I want to ask you something, she said. Honestly. Go ahead. How long will this take, trial sentencing, the whole thing? Broward was quiet for a moment, the honest pause of someone who was not going to give a comfortable answer when an accurate one was available. Cases of this scope typically take 18 months to 2 years to reach trial, she said, possibly longer if there are significant pretrial motions, which there will be. Derek Vaughn will have capable defense counsel, and they will use every available legal mechanism. So 2 years, Emily said. Potentially, but he is in custody for that 2 years. He's not in your storage room. He's not walking into your laundromat. Whatever happens in court, the immediate threat to your business has been removed. Emily thought about that word immediately, the way it contained everything it didn't say about what was not immediate. What about the network, she said, the distribution operation across the 3 counties? If Derek is in custody, but the network exists, the arrests you've been re-outing about over the past 48 hours are part of that, Broward said. 17 arrests across the county in the last 2 days connected to the evidence chain your documentation initiated. The network isn't gone. These things never disappear overnight, but its operational infrastructure has been significantly disrupted. 17, Emily said. Your 4 months of footage identified 11 individuals we hadn't been able to connect to specific locations, Broward said. 11 out of 14 months of investigation. Emily stood with that number. 11 people. Faces on her security camera moving through her hallway, going in and out of a storage room in the back of her laundromat that a 14-month investigation hadn't been able to connect to specific locations until she handed over 4 months of footage from cameras that Derek had studied carefully and believed he understood. He had studied the cameras. He had not understood them. One more question, Emily said. Of course. Gary Simmons, the property management contact. Cooperating fully, Broward said. He provided communications records documenting 3 months of contact with the individuals connected to Vaughn's operation. He's facing a misdemeanor charge of accessory, which with full cooperation may be reduced to a civil penalty. A brief pause. He asked through his lawyer that I convey his apology to you. I'm conveying it. I'll leave it to you what to do with it. Emily thought about Gary Simmons, a man she had never met who worked in a building she dealt with by phone and email, who had been approached 3 weeks ago by Derek's people and had said yes to something he didn't fully understand the shape of, and who had spent 3 months looking for violations in her lease that didn't exist, and who was now cooperating with a prosecutor and thinking about a misdemeanor charge and asking a lawyer to pass along an apology to the woman he'd been trying to help push out of her building. She thought about Diane and Marcus, about Pete and his 7 months and his shoulders releasing in the corner of her laundromat. She thought about how many people Derek Vaughn's operation had touched and bent and pulled into its orbit, people who had said yes for different reasons: fear, money, short-sightedness, the particular human failure of underestimating how far a small yes could go, and who were now dealing with the weight of those yeses. Tell Mr. Simmons' lawyer, Emily said carefully, that I accept the apology and that I hope he does right the rest of the way. I'll pass that along, Broward said. After she hung up, Emily stood at the back counter for a moment and let herself feel the size of what she just heard. 17 arrests, 11 identifications from her footage, Colt in cooperation discussions, Derek in custody without bail, Gary apologizing through a lawyer. The machine she had set in motion in January, not by doing anything dramatic, by doing exactly the right, quiet, careful, boring thing day after day, receipt after receipt, camera frame after camera frame, that machine was still running. It was running in courtrooms and DA offices and cooperation agreements and police departments across 3 counties. It was going to keep running for 2 years, maybe longer. She had done that. She went back to her counter. At 3 o'clock, Rosa came in. Not on a Saturday, on a Thursday. She came in with her laundry bag and her familiar purposeful walk and put her bag down near Machine 9 and looked at Emily. I told you Saturday, she said. You did, Emily agreed. I couldn't wait, Rosa said simply. Is that ridiculous? No, Emily said. Rosa loaded Machine 9. She sat in the plastic chairs the way she had sat in them every Saturday for 9 years. She took out her phone and scrolled through something and then put it away and just sat the way she used to sit before the months when sitting in Silver Creek Laundry had felt complicated. At 3:30, Maria came in, not for a pickup, with laundry. She came in and looked at Emily with the expression of someone who has been carrying a small guilt for several weeks and has decided today is the day to set it down. I should have done more, Maria said. That night, when I knocked and you said come back in the morning, I knew something was wrong. I should have called someone. You called Rosa, Emily said. Rosa called 3 people. Word got around. Maria blinked. She stopped. That helped. It helped, Emily said. The neighborhood talking helped. It was part of the whole thing. Emily looked at her steadily. What you did, the way you responded when I told you to come back in the morning, the fact that you heard it and understood and didn't push, that might have been the most useful thing anyone did that night. If you'd pushed, if you'd made noise at the door, Derek's people would have gotten more agitated. You read the situation exactly right. Maria stood there with the specific expression of a person who has been feeling bad about something and has just been told that the thing they felt bad about was actually correct. I just went home and worried, she said, and called Rosa, Emily said, and called Rosa. Maria agreed. She loaded her machine. She sat down next to Rosa. The 2 women talked about the article, about the arrests, about things that had nothing to do with any of it, the ordinary conversation of people comfortable in a shared space. And Emily listened to them from behind her counter and felt the sound of it settle into the building the way sound settles into a space it belongs in. At 4:45, Jackson Walker walked in. He was carrying laundry. It was Thursday, not Tuesday. Rosa looked up from her phone. She looked at the vest, at the patches. She looked at Emily with a question in her face. Emily gave the smallest nod. Rosa looked back at Jackson with an expression that had converted from wariness to something that was trying to figure out the right way to feel about a man who had apparently been watching over her laundromat for months from a corner chair without anyone knowing. Jackson walked to the counter. He put his canvas laundry bag down. Thursday, Emily said. I had a light week, he said. He pulled out his wallet to pay for detergent. It's on the house, Emily said. He looked at her. I know you don't, Emily said. It's still on the house. He accepted the detergent without further argument. He loaded his machine. He sat in the corner by machine 7. His corner, the chair that Emily was fairly certain she was never going to let anyone else claim, without thinking about this, about all of it, and took out his phone. Rosa cleared her throat. Jackson looked up. You're the one who was here that night, Rosa said. It was not quite a question. I was doing my laundry, Jackson said. You called people. I let some people know where I was, Jackson said. Rosa studied him. And since February, she said, you've been coming every Tuesday. Good machines, Jackson said. Rosa pressed her lips together. Emily could see her working through whether to say more. Rosa was not a person who left things unsaid for long. Thank you, Rosa said finally. On behalf of the people who use this place, thank you for being here when we weren't. Jackson looked at Rosa for a moment, then at Emily, then at his phone. Thank you for coming back, he said. Rosa sat with that. She went back to her own phone. The 3 of them occupied the laundromat in their separate orbits. Rosa and Maria at their machines. Jackson in his corner. Emily behind her counter in the specific, comfortable quiet of people who have been through something together without having planned to be together, who are now simply sharing the same space in the aftermath of it. At 5:30, Pete came in. He had no laundry. He never had laundry. The diner had a commercial service for the restaurant linens. He came in wearing his work clothes with the look of a man who has been through 48 hours of a particular kind of stress and has come out the other side of it significantly lighter. I talked to Broward, he said to Emily, the assistant DA. She called me too, Emily said. They're not going to charge me formally, Pete said. Misdemeanor was on the table and I thought, he stopped. I thought I was going to spend 6 months in court, but they said the cooperation was complete and substantive, and they were recommending a civil penalty and community service. That's good, Emily said. 7 months of looking the other way, Pete said, and they're letting me off with community service. You gave them something they needed, Emily said. You gave them more, Pete said, and you didn't do anything wrong. Emily looked at him. That's the difference, she said. I didn't do anything wrong, you did. And then you stopped and you cooperated, and that matters. But yeah, that's the difference. Pete accepted this without flinching. He had the look of a man who had decided to stop flinching from true things. I want to do something, he said, for this place, for you. I don't know what, I don't want to be weird about it, but I owe you something. Emily thought about it. Come on Saturdays, she said. Tell anyone who asks you for a diner recommendation to come here for laundry. Pete blinked. That's it. Referrals are how a neighborhood business lives, Emily said. You want to do something useful, send people my way. I thought you'd want, he stopped. I thought you'd be angrier. I'm past angry, Emily said. Angry was 4 months ago. Now I just want my business to grow back. She looked at him steadily. Help with that. Pete nodded. He left. Rosa watched him go from across the floor. Who was that? She said. Neighbor, Emily said. At 6:15, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize, a 202 area code, which was Washington, D.C. The text read, Ms. Carter, my name is Linda Vasquez, federal prosecutor, DOJ Organized Crime Division. I've been briefed on the Vaughn case and on the role your documentation played. I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience about the possibility of your case being incorporated into a federal prosecution. Please respond when you have a moment. Emily read this 3 times. She looked up. Jackson was watching her from his corner. Something happened, he said. It wasn't a question. He had the specific sensitivity of someone who has learned to read the slight changes in a person's face from across a room. Emily walked across the floor to machine 7. She held out her phone with the text visible. Jackson read it. He handed the phone back. He said nothing for a moment. Federal? Emily said. Yes, Jackson said. That's bigger than county. Much bigger, Jackson said. She's saying the case might go federal. That's what she's saying. Emily stood there with her phone and the 202 area code and the name Linda Vasquez and the specific vertigo of something that had started as a woman trying to keep her storage room and had become, by increments, she could trace but couldn't quite believe, a piece of something that the United States Department of Justice wanted to talk to her about. This is too big, Emily said, quietly, not panicked, just honest. It's big, Jackson agreed. When Derek walked in with his bag of laundry in January, I thought I was dealing with a low-level street dealer who had a storage room problem. I know. I was not dealing with a low-level street dealer who had a storage room problem. No, Jackson said, you weren't. Emily looked at her phone. Patricia, she said. Call Patricia, Jackson agreed. She called Patricia. Patricia answered on the first ring, which meant Patricia had also received a call or an email from Linda Vasquez, which meant Patricia had been expecting this conversation. You got the text, Patricia said. How long have you known this was a possibility? Emily said. Since yesterday afternoon when Broward called me after she called you. She told me the evidence from your storage room had triggered interest at the federal level. I didn't want to tell you until you had the direct contact. Patricia, I know, I should have told you. Yes, Emily said, you should have. A brief pause. You're right, I'm sorry. I was trying to manage the information flow, and I managed it wrong. Patricia's voice was direct, no hedging. Here's where we are. The distribution network Vaughn was part of crosses state lines. That makes it a federal case by definition. The DOJ has been building a RICO investigation organized crime statutes for approximately 2 years. The Silver Creek evidence is a local nexus that connects to their larger map. If they incorporate this case federally, the charges against Vaughn become significantly more serious. The sentencing exposure increases substantially, and the network prosecution becomes more comprehensive. Emily moved back toward the counter. Her legs were working. The floor was solid. Everything was physically fine. What does it mean for me? She said. It means you would potentially testify before a federal grand jury, Patricia said. It means your documentation becomes part of a federal evidentiary record. It means a federal prosecutor becomes part of your life for the next 2 to 3 years. Another pause. It also means Derek Vaughn is not looking at a county sentence. He's looking at federal RICO charges, which is an entirely different category of consequence. Emily set her hand flat on the counter. Call Linda Vasquez back, Patricia said. Not today, let's talk first. Tomorrow morning, my office at 8, we go through every implication before you say yes or no to anything. Yes, Emily said. Emily, yes. I want to say this clearly. What you built, the way you built it, the fact that you documented everything in a legally admissible way, without being coached by anyone, without contaminating anything, just by doing the right thing consistently for 4 months. That's why they're calling. Federal prosecutors don't call witnesses with incomplete or questionable evidence. They call people who built something solid. Emily looked at the counter, at the receipts, at the reading glasses, next to the cold coffee that she never quite finished. I was just keeping my laundromat, she said. I know, Patricia said, but the way you kept it turned out to matter a lot more than either of us knew. After she hung up, Emily stood behind her counter and let the noise of the evening floor wash around her. Rosa and Maria at their machines, Jackson in his corner. A new wave of evening customers coming in with their bags and their coins and their ordinary needs. And she thought about 2 years, 2 more years of this. Testimony, grand jury, federal proceedings. Derek Vaughn's defense team, which was going to be very capable and very aggressive, examining everything she had ever said and written and done. 2 more years of this story not being over. She had thought last night might have been close to the end. She had been wrong about the scale of this since January. She was apparently still wrong about the scale of it. But here was the thing she kept arriving at, the thing she could not argue herself out of. No matter how large the scale became, she had a laundromat. It was hers. It was running. The floor was full of customers on a Thursday evening. Rosa was in her regular chair. Jackson was in his corner. Pete had gone back to his diner to cooperate and make things right. Diane's son Marcus was talking to prosecutors and trying to find a way back from 8 months of wrong choices. Gary Simmons was pulling communications records and learning what an apology costs. All of it, the federal investigation, the county charges, the 17 arrests, the DA and the reporter, and the 202 area code, all of it was downstream of a woman who had decided in January that her storage room was not available for other people's purposes, and who had sat down that same night and started writing dates and times in a log she kept in a locked drawer. She was not the center of something large. She was the beginning of something that had been waiting for a beginning. At 8 o'clock, the evening floor was winding down. Jackson brought his laundry to the counter to fold it. He always folded at the counter, had done it every Tuesday since February, and Emily had always been quietly grateful for it because it gave them a reason to talk, and he worked through a flannel shirt and a pair of jeans and 3 gray t-shirts with the efficient, unsentimental speed of a man who has been doing his own laundry for 40 years. Federal case, he said, folding the second t-shirt. Apparently, Emily said. You're going to say yes, he said. I'm going to meet with Patricia first. And then you're going to say yes, Jackson said. Emily watched him fold the third shirt. You knew this was bigger than what I could see, she said. I had some idea. Since February, since I asked around, he said, what Derek was storing, the people coming through, the scale of it was bigger than a street-level dealer. I didn't know the specifics, but the shape of it was larger. Did Frank know? Frank suspected. And neither of you told me. Jackson put the folded shirts in his bag. We told you what you needed to know to do what you were doing, he said, which was build a case, a specific, admissible, legally sound case against the person threatening your business. If I told you in March that this might be connected to something federal scale, what would have changed? Emily thought about it honestly. I'd have been scared, she said. Yes, Jackson said. I might have stopped documenting, thought it was too big for me. Yes, or I might have tried to do more than I should have. Yes, Jackson said. Any of those options ends badly. He zipped his bag. What you needed to know was what was in front of you. What was in front of you was Derek Vaughn threatening your business. Everything else was someone else's job. Emily stood with that. You're very strategic for a man who just does laundry, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. I've been around, he said. At 9 o'clock, the laundromat was nearly empty. One last customer at machine 11, a young woman Emily didn't recognize, college-age earphones and completely absorbed in whatever she was watching on her phone. The machines running their last cycles of the evening. At 9:20, the young woman collected her laundry and left, thanking Emily on the way out with the brief, genuine politeness of someone who has been somewhere they felt comfortable. The door closed. The laundromat was empty. Emily started her end-of-day routine. Register, machines, floors, the log in the drawer under the counter. She had been adding to it every night for 4 months, and she was not going to stop now. Not with a federal case in progress and 2 more years of this ahead of her. She opened the log, She picked up her pen. She wrote Thursday's entry. Article ran page 3. Carolyn came. Rosa came early, said she couldn't wait until Saturday. Maria came. Jackson came Thursday, not Tuesday. Pete came to say thank you and tell me they're not charging him formally. D.A. Broward called 17 arrests, Colton cooperation discussions. Derek denied bail. Federal prosecutor Linda Vasquez texted 202 area code. Meeting with Patricia at 8 tomorrow. She paused. She thought about what to write next. She thought about 12 years. About the day she had bought a broken laundromat in a forgotten neighborhood and believed it deserved a second chance. About the receipt she'd been tallying on the night Derek walked in, the cold coffee, the reading glasses, the small, ordinary, ongoing business of keeping a place alive. She thought about the storage room door empty and closed. She thought about Rosa in her regular chair, and Jackson in his corner, and the young woman with the earphones who had thanked Emily on the way out with the brief, genuine politeness of someone who had been somewhere they felt comfortable. She thought about Linda Vasquez's text and what 2 more years of this looked like and whether she was ready for it. She wrote, "Talk to Patricia. She says the way I built the case is why they're calling clean admissible consistent. She said federal prosecutors don't call witnesses with incomplete evidence. They call people who built something solid." She stopped. She put the pen down. She looked at what she had written. She picked the pen back up. She wrote one more line. "I built it. Whatever happens next, however large this gets, however long it runs, I built the thing that made it possible. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody handed me a case. I kept my laundromat and I kept my documentation and I kept showing up, and it turned out that was enough. More than enough." She closed the log. She closed the drawer. She locked it. She stood in the quiet of her laundromat on a Thursday night, 4 months after the beginning of the worst professional period of her life, and 48 hours after the beginning of the end of it, and she felt the building around her with the specific awareness of a person who has almost lost something and has kept it and will never quite stop knowing the difference between having it and not. This building, her building. The machines that she had repaired herself in the early years, the walls she had painted the customer names, she had learned the plastic chairs that had been replaced twice and still somehow looked exactly the same. The framed opening day photograph on the counter with her younger face in the ribbon, the storage room in the back that was finally after 4 months just a storage room again. All of it hers, still hers. She turned off the lights. She walked to the front door. She stopped. She looked back at the dark of the laundromat, at machine 7, at the counter, at the place where Derek had stood when he locked the door and told her the place worked for him now, at the corner where Jackson had sat with his coffee, and the absolute calm of a man who already knew how this was going to end. She thought about what Jackson had said that first night, 3 weeks before everything happened, when he had put a folded piece of paper on her counter and told her to call if she ever felt like the place wasn't hers anymore. Sometimes people don't need someone to fight for them. Sometimes they just need someone to know they're not alone. She had not called the number. She had put a red sign on the counter instead. She had stood at her counter and kept her reading glasses on her face and kept building the things she was building and trusted without knowing exactly why that the right people were going to show up when the right moment arrived. They had. Not because she had been helpless and needed rescuing, because she had been capable and deserved backup. There was a difference, and the difference was everything. She stepped outside. She locked the door. The street was quiet, the ordinary city doing its ordinary things. Somewhere across town, Derek Vaughn was in a facility waiting for a trial that was going to take 2 years and end with federal RICO charges. Somewhere, Patricia Hale was preparing for an 8 o'clock meeting that would change the shape of the next 2 years of Emily's life. Somewhere, Jackson Walker was driving home on whatever roads he drove, in whatever version of his complicated life existed outside Tuesday evenings at a laundromat. Somewhere, Linda Vasquez's text was sitting in Emily's phone unanswered, a 202 area code, waiting for a woman to decide what the next chapter of this looked like. Emily stood on the sidewalk outside Silver Creek Laundry and breathed the night air and made no decisions and felt no urgency and let the quiet be quiet. Tomorrow she would meet Patricia. Tomorrow she would decide. Tomorrow the next 2 years would begin to take their shape. But tonight the laundromat was clean and closed and locked and full of machines that would be ready when she opened the doors in the morning. Tonight Rosa was going to come back on Saturday, and Maria had already been there Thursday, and the young woman with the earphones had thanked Emily on the way out for no reason except that the place had felt comfortable and she had wanted to say so. Tonight, every piece of evidence Emily had ever collected was in the right hands, doing the right work, building the right case. Tonight, the sign above the door still said Silver Creek Laundry, in the same letters it had always said, and it unchanged through 12 years and 4 months, and 30 motorcycles arriving on a midnight street, and a man who had believed he was walking into a place with nobody in it worth worrying about. He had been wrong about the place. He had been wrong about the woman, and he had been most catastrophically, most completely, most irreversibly wrong about the one thing that had mattered most from the very beginning. The thing that had always been true, even in the months when it was hardest to feel Emily. Carter had never, not for a single day, been alone in her laundromat. She had simply been the one standing at the front of it, and she always would be.